Chapter 289. Are you still wondering why this old man would take you in as a disciple just because of your status as an admiral? Liu Lei saw the doubt in Jiu Han's heart and smiled. Have you heard of a saying? Cast the net wide, catch more fish, and select the best. Sword Immortal Baiju and I have already discussed it. In order to ensure that Yuzhang City can survive in the difficult sword era 5 years later, we must nurture those swordbearers with potential, so that Yuzhang City will not be without successors. In my life, I have seen countless geniuses. Some of them were even more talented than I am. One of them could even form a sword affinity with 10% of sword maidens at the same time. Such talents, as long as they continue to grow, 10% or 20% of them can reach my current position. But in the end, they all died. It's not that they did not have great strength, it's just that they were unlucky and met a strong enemy. They could not defeat, hide, or escape, and so they fell in the desert ruins. Liu Lei sighed. It's not that we can't save them. As long as we old guys at the Immortal Sword tier are willing to help, it's not impossible to save them from their desperate situation. But in the end, we old guys are still stingy with our lives. Who would be willing to give up 20 days of their lives to save someone who has nothing to do with them? Give up 20 days of life? Guhan was stunned. Didn't they say that using the giant world-breaking hand would only cause a period of weakness for 20 days? How did it become 20 days of life? This was what Wuzhang Shifang had said himself. Senior, why is it said on the internet that using the giant world-breaking hand will only cause a period of weakness for about 20 days? Guhan asked directly. Page, that refers to those sword masters who are full of vigor. They practice ancient martial arts, and the vigor in their bodies is endless. Using the giant world-breaking hand to save you little guys requires a lot of vigor. Those who practice martial arts are full of vigor, and may be able to withstand the consumption of the giant world-breaking hand. But for old guys like us, if we want to use the break world big hand, we have to use our own lives. So that's how it is. Guhan was secretly startled. Wuzhang Shifang said that he would only have a period of 20 days of weakness. Didn't that mean that Wuzhang Shifang was also a sword master who cultivated ancient martial arts? This was something that had never been mentioned in the published information about Wuzhang Shifang. Guhan suppressed the speculation in his heart and listened to Liu Lei continue. If it weren't for the difficult sword era, this would be the right thing to do. It's understandable to preserve one's lifespan. However, in the upcoming difficult sword era, we would be digging our own graves if we continue to allow talented sword wielders to fall into the hands of our enemies. That's why Baiju and I each took in 2 disciples with the greatest potential. We'll escort them along the way so that they won't die prematurely on the path of immortal sword wielders. Guhan, you have great potential. I am very optimistic about you. You are one of the 2 disciples that I want to take in. Liu Lei explained the reason why he took the initiative to take in Guhan as a disciple. All the problems were explained clearly. Liu Lei had a premonition that he did not have much time left. He planned to choose those sword wielders with great potential to escort them along the way, so that they could become immortal sword wielders as soon as possible. This way, Yuzhang City would not have no immortal sword wielders after the death of Liu Lei and Baiju. I've told you everything I need to tell you. Why don't you quickly kneel down and worship me as your master? Liu Lei snorted coldly. How could this Guhan be so tactless? Did he want him to beg him? Guhan was naturally very willing to worship Liu Lei as his master. However, a few days ago, he thought that he was smart to worship Wuzhang Shifang as his master. Now, it had become a huge hidden danger. He had already agreed to participate in Wuzhang Shifang's test, but now he suddenly worshipped Liu Lei as his master. Who knew if Wuzhang Shifang would be petty and bear a grudge against him? This was a blatant slap to Wuzhang Shifang's face. At that time, it might cause some unnecessary trouble. At the same time, if he concealed this matter and did not tell Liu Lei. If this matter reached Liu Lei's ears in the future, wouldn't he be in a terrible position? Therefore, Guhan had to take the initiative to tell Liu Lei about him worshipping Wuzhang Shifang as his master. The rest was up to Liu Lei to decide. If there was any blame, it would be on Liu Lei. Therefore, Guhan replied decisively. Senior, it's not that I don't want to worship you as my master. It's just that I have an agreement with Wuzhang Shifang, so I dare not make a rash decision. As soon as Guhan said this, Liu Lei was surprised. How did this guy get involved with Wuzhang Shifang? What agreement do you have with Wuzhang Shifang? Tell me quickly. Therefore, Guhan told Liu Lei everything about himself and Wuzhang Shifang without hiding anything. Liu Lei's old face was a myriad of colors as he listened, and he did not know whether to laugh or cry. He never thought that the disciple he fancied would actually have a secret relationship with Wuzhang Shifang. No, it seemed that the adjective secret relationship could not be used. However, he did not expect that the Grand Prince seed was dug out by this kid, Guhan. This time, Liu Lei was even more satisfied with Guhan. What was the most important thing to become an immortal sword wielder? Strength, bloodline, wisdom. Although these things were of some help to become an immortal sword wielder, in the end, they were not the most important thing to become an immortal sword wielder. For an immortal sword wielder, the most important thing was one's character, or luck. Even if one's strength was nature-defying, bloodline pure, and wisdom outstanding. As long as one's character was bad, luck was bad, and there was no sword maiden of the next level who was willing to synchronize with you, then one would be trash, destined to be like this for the rest of one's life. This kind of example was not uncommon. Countless amazing sword wielder had fallen on this road. The most famous one was a famed sword wielder 500 years ago. He became a famed sword wielder at the age of 19. With the physique of a famed sword wielder, he finally accumulated the standard of 10 million quarks of sword essence to reach the Gendi level. As a famed sword wielder, he could skip 4 levels of Yuan Ku and fight against the U-level Yuan Ku, who was equivalent to an immortal sword wielder. Such an amazing sword wielder was once thought to be the next Gendi sword wielder, but in the end, he died of old age at the famed sword level. No matter how amazing he was, there was no sword maiden of the spiritual sword level who was willing to synchronize with him. This was completely helpless. Therefore, when Liu Lei heard that Guhan was able to dig out a prince seed, his satisfaction with Guhan immediately skyrocketed. He had dug out a prince seed on his first mining trip. With this kind of character, this kind of luck, it seemed that he was at least a spiritual sword level. Guhan, don't worry. This sword immortal will help you clarify this matter with sword immortal Shifang. That sword immortal Shifang took your prince seed and still set up this almost impossible test for you. This means that he was originally not willing to take you as a disciple, and only wanted your prince seed. I will help you reject him. I think he will only be happy and not angry. Liu Lei's words were reasonable and convincing. Indeed, Wuzhang Shifang did not want to take Guhan as a disciple. With Liu Lei taking the blame, Wuzhang Shifang was naturally more than willing. Guhan understands. Guhan thanks Master. Seeing that Liu Lei had said things to this extent and taken the blame to this extent, if Guhan still refused, then he would really be an idiot. Therefore, Ji Yuhan made a prompt decision and kowtowed a few times in front of Liu Lei, calling him master and whatnot as if it was free. Ha ha ha. Liu Lei laughed heartily. Not only was this disciple's luck not bad, he was also smart and tactful. Very good, very good. Suddenly, Liu Lei seemed to have thought of something. His face darkened. What a pity, what a pity. He sighed twice. I wonder why Master is sighing. Guhan asked obediently. Sigh, Master is just feeling pity for the prince seed that you gave to that Wuzhang Shifang. Now that I have taken you in as a disciple, the prince seed is in his hands. He did nothing and just got a prince seed out of thin air. Isn't that a pity? Liu Lei felt sorry for the prince seed that Guhan had given to Wuzhang Shifang. This thing was an irresistible temptation to any immortal sword wielder. Master, don't be silly. Look at what this disciple has in his hands. Guhan opened his hands, and a resplendent dimensional crystal mine glistened. You still have a prince seed. Liu Lei sucked in a breath of cold air as he stared at the duke seed in Ji Yuhan's hand. He didn't even blink. Good heavens, what kind of disciple did he take in? He actually managed to obtain a prince seed and 2 duke seeds in one go. This kind of character was something that had never been seen before. Master doesn't know, but this disciple's luck has always been good. This time, I got a prince seed, 2 prince seeds, and a duke seed. This is the last prince seed I have in my hands. Master accepted me as a disciple, and I have nothing to repay you with. I can only give this last prince seed to Master as a gift. I hope Master doesn't mind. Guhan, this liar, had clearly gotten 4 prince seeds. At this time, there were still 2 prince seeds in his dimensional pocket. Good disciple, I will accept your gift. Liu Lei laughed and did not stand on ceremony. He put Guhan's prince seed into his pocket. However, after receiving such a precious gift from Guhan, Liu Lei naturally could not show any other expression. He walked to the bookshelf in the office, took out a thick book, and handed it to Guhan. Good disciple, this book is Master's gift. Keep it well and study it day and night. You will have unexpected gains. Guhan took the book that Liu Lei gave him. He saw the words gentleman's book written on the cover. Other than that, there was nothing else on the cover. Guhan flipped open the book and read a few pages. Then, he decisively closed the book and put it into his dimensional pocket. This book was actually filled with pictures of anime that could make one's blood boil. Guhan did not expect that the book with the name Gentleman was actually a book like this. However, since Liu Lei gave this book to Guhan, there must be a reason. Guhan could not be careless. He wanted to bring it home and study it carefully. Chapter 290. Have you really decided to take this Guhan as your disciple? When Jiyu Han left Liu Lei's room, White Stallion Sword Immortal Ju Wudao actually walked out from a small door in the office. It seemed like Ju Wudao had seen everything that had just happened. He already knelt down and called me master. Why are you still asking me this question? Liu Lei rolled his eyes at Ju Wudao. Why? Are you envious that I took in a good disciple? TSK, our Yuzhang city's best treasured sword, the heavenly sword, was taken by him. What reason do I have not to take him as my disciple? He only took the heavenly sword. Whether he really has potential or not, we still need to test him in actual combat. Ju Wudao said coldly. What's there to test? Just for this regional king seed alone, I have to take him down. Liu Lei bragged about his regional king seed in front of Ju Wudao. He had originally planned to take a loss by taking down Guhan today. He had not expected to earn a regional king seed for himself. Was it true that good people were rewarded in this world? A regional king seed like you should share half with me. Looking at the regional king seed in Liu Lei's hands, Ju Wudao, who was a little jealous, suddenly said this. Why should I? Why should I share half with you? Liu Lei was indignant. This is a gift from my disciple to me, his master. What has it got to do with you? Of course it has something to do with me, Ju Wudao said slowly. The medical pod that saved his life was given to him by me. Without my medical pod, he would have died a long time ago. Where are you going to find this disciple? Don't talk nonsense with me. How much is a medical chamber worth? You want to share it with my royal seed with just this? Hurry up and scram. Liu Lei looked at Ju Wudao with disdain. This guy was too shameless. He wanted to get a regional king seed with the help of a medical pod? PH, that's not an ordinary medical pod. It's my immortal sword grade medical pod. It's the medical pod that you and I use to save lives. Until now, my medical pod is still in your disciple's hands. Shouldn't we settle this score? Ju Wudao said angrily. This Liu Lei was too infuriating. All right, forget it. It's just an immortal sword rank medical pod. What the hell is this? Look at how wronged you are. Liu Lei casually shook out a medical pod from his dimensional pocket and threw it in front of Ju Wudao. Take it. This is mine. It's brand new and unopened. I'll return it to you on behalf of my disciple. Now we're friends. Seeing the medical chamber in front of him, Ju Wudao almost couldn't breathe. Damn it, it seemed that he didn't even have the room to refute. Ife, hurry up and choose one. I'm begging you. You've already exceeded the time limit by 5 minutes. If the supervisor finds out, I'll be screwed. On the first floor of the sword pavilion, a guide accompanied Song Ifei as he walked among the sword ladies. Unlike the guide who despised Guhan, This guide seemed to have a good relationship with Song Yifei. He even delayed Song Yifei's choice. This was not strange. Song Yifei was a frequent customer of the Sword Pavilion. She had been to the Sword Pavilion almost 40 times. She also happened to work at the service center for sword bearers. Naturally, she was familiar with the staff of the Sword Pavilion. In addition, Song Yifei had a good personality and treated her friends sincerely. When she was in trouble, she would do her best to help. Therefore, she was very popular in the Sword Pavilion. In order to give Song Yifei more time to choose a sword lady, the guide even took the initiative to help her delay time. Compared to Guhan, this one was like heaven and earth. Alright, then I'll. Song Yifei sighed. She did not mean to delay time. It was just that she had failed so many times that she was starting to have an instinctive fear of choosing a sword lady. Because she was afraid that she would fail again, Song Yifei did not even have the courage to hold the sword lady. Then I'll try this one. Song Yifei set her sights on an ancient sword rank sword lady called the Shadowless Sword. On the counter of the Shadowless Sword, the golden brocade box was empty. There was only a long sword in the silver brocade box. This meant that the sword lady here was the artificial sword lady of the Shadowless Sword, not the natural sword lady of the Shadowless Sword. Song Yifei choosing the Shadowless Sword meant that she had given up on the natural sword lady and chosen the artificial sword lady, which had a higher success rate. This was a choice that she had no other choice. After failing for so long, Song Yifei had completely lost confidence in herself. She just wanted to synchronize quickly and get rid of the obsession in her heart. Don't be in such a hurry to choose, Yifei. There's no harm in looking a little longer. Another guide walked over and said softly to Song Yifei and the guide who had been accompanying Song Yifei, "You guys don't know, but I heard that Lady Yi Tian has been born. The entire second floor is in chaos. The leaders are all gathered on the second floor to watch the show. They don't have time to help you stall for time. Don't rush Yifei. Let her choose a little longer. How can she succeed in a hurry?" The appearance of this guide completely proved Ji Yuhan's failure as a person. What? Lady Yi Tian has been born? Song Yifei was shocked. This news was too sudden. She needed a lot of time to digest this shocking news. Yeah, I heard that it was coordinated by a handsome young man. However, Xiao Qin, who was guiding him, was unlucky. I don't know why, but she's going to be fined 2 months of her salary. How tragic. While the two guides were talking about the Sky-Reliant sword, Song Yifei was lost in thought. She did not know why, but she felt that the handsome guy who had synchronized with the Sky-Reliant sword was Ji Yuhan. Thinking of this, Song Yifei began to panic. She suddenly felt that the river-like gap between her and Guhan had instantly become a quicksand river. Yifei, let's go somewhere else. There's a natural sword lady there. The wielder of the sword just died. You definitely haven't tried it before. I'll take you there to try it. The guide who had come later pulled Song Yifei and wanted to lead her to another place. The guide exerted force, but she realized that Song Yifei's feet seemed to be nailed down. She could not move at all. Yifei, what's wrong? The guide asked in confusion. Sister, thank you for your kindness. I've already decided. I'll try it with this shadowless sword. Song Yifei smiled bitterly. She was about to touch the artificial shadowless sword. She did not know why, but she just wanted to end the synchronized experiment quickly and escape from the sword pavilion. But this is only an artificial sword lady. Moreover, the guide who came later wanted to persuade her, but she was stopped by the one who had come earlier. Forget it. Since Yifei has chosen this, she will choose this. No matter how powerful your sword lady is, it's useless if she doesn't succeed. On the contrary, since she has not firmly chosen this, there might be a reason behind it. Don't stop her. All right, you're right. After being persuaded, the guide gave up on trying to persuade Song Yifei. Hearing this, Song Yifei's heart was like a pickled vegetable in a can. How could she be fated with this shadowless sword? She just wanted to escape from this place as soon as possible. Song Yifei's hand moved closer to the artificial shadowless sword in the brocade box. If there was no reaction for 10 seconds after touching it, then Song Yifei's synchronized experiment would fail. However, Song Yifei was already used to failure. Girl, if I were you, I would never touch that sword. At this critical moment, a leisurely voice suddenly came from the sky. Wait, why is it coming from the sky? Song of Fei and the two guides raised their heads and saw a beauty in ancient clothes sitting on the chandelier on the ceiling. She was holding a sword in one hand and a wine gourd in the other. She gulped down a mouthful of wine. Who are you? Come down now. Don't you know that alcohol is forbidden in the sword pavilion? The guide was a little angry at this scene. How dare she drink in the sword pavilion? That was a crime worthy of imprisonment. Heroine, I'm coming down now. The beautiful woman in the ancient costume jumped down from the chandelier and steadily appeared in front of the three of them. A strong aroma of wine instantly filled the nostrils of Song of Fei and the other two. The aroma of wine was so fragrant and tempting that even Song of Fei and the other two who never drank could not help but want to take a sip of the wine in the wine gourd. Are you the sword lady? Looking at Yi Tian's equipment and the shining sword in her hand, the two guides suddenly realized that the person talking to them was a sword lady. No wonder she dared to drink in the sword pavilion. Those who don't know are fearless. However, why was this sword lady here alone? Where did her sword wielder go? Respected sword lady, alcohol is forbidden in the sword pavilion. Can you drink after you leave the sword pavilion? Since the other party was a sword lady, their attitude couldn't be bad. They had to be gentle and persuasive. This heroine wants to drink. Even if the sky falls down, don't think of stopping me. Yi Tian gulped down another mouthful of wine and burped. She smiled at Song of Fei and said, Girl, don't touch this shadowless sword. It doesn't suit you. In other words, there aren't many ancient sword ladies that suit you in the whole world. I know. My talent is too bad. Song of Fei's expression was gloomy. Hehe, but since there aren't many, there are still a few that suit you. Just nice, I know a sword lady that suits you. Yi Tian looked at Song of Fei teasingly and said, How about it? Do you want to know which sword lady it is? Suddenly hearing Yi Tian say that there was a suitable sword maiden for her, Song of Fei felt as if she had flown up to the heavens. Right now, she was like a drowning person. Even if it was a reed, she would hold it tightly in her hands, unwilling to let go. However, this sword lady looked very frivolous. Did she really know where the sword lady suited her was? How about it? Do you want to know? Yi Tian asked again. Yes, very much. I really want to know. Please tell me which sword lady it is. If I really succeed, I will be grateful to you for the rest of my life. Song of Fei said excitedly. Who cares about her? She had to try her best. All right, but I have a condition. As Yi Tian spoke, he took a step forward and walked to Song of Fei's side. He wrapped his arms around Song of Fei's waist and pulled her into his embrace. Then, like a pervert, he took a deep breath on Song of Fei's neck. Let me kiss you. Yi Tian suddenly said. What? Song of Fei couldn't react at all. Pa. Yi Tian kissed Song of Fei's lips. Oh, it was a French kiss. Chapter 291. This is the place. Without the guide leading the way, Yi Tian led Song of Fei around the first floor of the sword pavilion with great familiarity. Finally, they arrived at a corner with the darkest lights and the worst visibility. Most of the counters there were empty. There were no brocade boxes on them. Only a few of them had one or two brocade boxes on them. If one were to go in and look at the brocade boxes, one would be disappointed to find that they were still empty. Therefore, there were no sword ladies in this area. No wonder the lights were dim and the wind was chilly. It turned out that the sword ladies were trying to save electricity. At first glance, this area was ridiculously large. It was even larger than the areas where the sword ladies were placed. This place feels a bit scary. Compared with the other bustling places in the sword pavilion, this area seemed extremely deserted. A gust of cold wind blew over and Song of Fei felt goosebumps all over his body. This is the reserved area of the sword pavilion. The guide said in a deep voice, This is the reserved area of the sword pavilion. It is prepared for the sword ladies who will enter the sword pavilion in the future. There are no sword ladies here. Lady, why did you bring Fei here? The so-called reserved area was prepared for the sword ladies who were not in their own sword pavilions. Every sword pavilion in a base city had the dream of collecting all the sword ladies. Therefore, they reserved a place for each sword lady in their own sword pavilions. Therefore, a sword pavilion that did not want to collect all the illustrations was not a good loser. It seemed that they had gone astray. Back to the topic at hand. In this reserved area, the counters inside were all empty, just like what Song Fei had seen. That was why the two guides were curious as to why the Sword Maiden would bring Song Fei here. There was no Sword Maiden here. Phut, how long have you little turnips lived? How long have I lived? Yi Tian glared at the two guides and said proudly, back then, the blueprint of this sword pavilion was drawn by me, this heroine. Otherwise, how could you build this sword pavilion to such a high and mighty level? The two guides looked at each other. They finally understood why the sword pavilion in Yuzhong City was rated as the ugliest among the 8 base cities. It was all because of the sword lady in front of them. This sword tower was built when Yuzhong City was founded. Didn't that mean that this sword maiden was one of the higher-ups who founded Yuzhong City? The two guides silently thought about the origins of this sword lady. Meanwhile, Yi Tian had walked to the darkest corner. She stomped on the ground a few times, listened to the sound, and nodded in satisfaction. This is the place. There's no mistake. This heroine's memory is really good. As he spoke, Yi Tian swung his Heaven Reliance sword and sent a powerful strand of sword energy towards the ground. No, no. Seeing this scene, the two guides turned pale with fright, but it was already too late. When Guhan came out of Liu Lei's office, he did not immediately see his sword maiden, Yi Tian. But that was not strange. In the game, Guhan had fully experienced Yi Tian's character. He knew that she liked to live a carefree life. It was impossible to expect her to wait for him outside the door. Therefore, Guhan calmly followed the feeling of the sword mark and slowly tracked Yi Tian's position. Luckily, Yi Tian did not seem to have left the sword pavilion. She was only on the first floor, which greatly reduced the difficulty for Guhan to find her. However, when Guhan was about to reach Yi Tian's position, he suddenly heard a loud explosion. Did Yuan Ku invade the base city? Ji Yuhan's heart skipped a beat. He immediately ran towards the location of the explosion. In the end, he saw Yi Tian standing there proudly with his face covered in dirt. There was a huge hole in the ground, and the two guides were crying as they looked at the scene. Oh, right, Song Fei was here as well. Yi Tian, what are you doing? How could you destroy the sword pavilion? A few black lines appeared on Ji Yuhan's forehead. As expected, this heavenly sword was not easy to deal with. The moment it appeared, it destroyed the grounds of the sword pavilion. Ordinary people would be immediately executed for destroying the buildings of the sword pavilion. As for the person wielding the sword, depending on the cause and effect of the matter, they would be sentenced to 10 years in prison or beheading. In short, destroying the sword pavilion was a crime punishable by death. What's wrong? Can't I destroy this place? Yi Tian coldly snorted, this place was built by me and that brat Shi Tian, brick by brick, tile by tile. Even if this heroine were to tear this place down, you juniors would still be able to say that it was good to tear it down. Do you understand? Yi Tian. Your Lady Yi Tian. The guides were intoxicated. So this description was absolutely correct. Sword Maiden was actually Lady Yi Tian, the #1 swordswoman. No wonder she said that the sword pavilion was built by her. Wasn't Lady Yi Tian the sword maiden of Zhetian Zhendi, the one who founded Yuzhong City? Logically speaking, this place was indeed built by Yi Tian, brick by brick. Yi Tian demolishing this place was just to get rid of her own property. So this sword maiden is Lady Yi Tian. It's just as I guessed, Guhan's sword maiden is really Lady Yi Tian, Song Fei thought to herself. When Guhan appeared, Song Fei had already lowered her head. Now that she had confirmed that Guhan had coordinated with Lady Yi Tian, she lowered her head and followed him. You, come here. Yi Tian's hand pulled, and Song Fei felt as if someone had pulled on his chest. He was pulled into Yi Tian's hand through the air. It turned out that Yi Tian had used sword chi to pull Song Fei to her side. Seeing Yi Tian suddenly do this, Guhan's face twitched. Yi Tian, she's not my friend. You're not allowed to do anything to her. I know she's your woman. I can smell your scent on her from 10 meters away, my new master. I have no intention of harming your woman. I just want to help her. She's such a pitiful girl, we can't let her go to waste. Yi Tian's words caused the entire scene to become ambiguous. When the two guides saw the look in Gu Han's eyes, they felt that something was wrong. That's because I was behind her in the queue. As time goes on, it's not strange for her to get some scent on me. Ife and I are just ordinary friends. Don't ruin Ife's innocence, Gu Han said coldly. This was a very convincing explanation, and it was indeed so. Unfortunately, the news of Song Ife having an affair with Ji Han, the sword-bearer of the heavenly sword, quickly spread through the sword tower. In the end, the entire sword-bearer service center knew about it. All right. You guys know clearly whether she's innocent or not. What has it got to do with this heroine? Yi Tian chuckled. He pointed at the big hole in the ground and said to Song Ife, "Do you see the brocade box in the hole? Take it out for me." The hole created by the heavenly sword was over a meter wide and a few meters deep. It was also a standard cubic space. It was impossible for a single sword chi from the heavenly sword to create such a large hole. Even the full-powered strike of a sword lady at the famed sword rank would not be able to create such a large hole. Therefore, there must have been such a hole in the first place. This was a secret room that had been hidden there when the sword pavilion was built. It seemed that this secret room was a secret room that the heavenly sword had secretly prepared when the heaven-shrouding sword emperor was building the sword tower. Otherwise, there was no way the heavenly sword would know that there was a secret room hidden underground. Gu Han walked to the top of the secret room and looked down. At the bottom of the secret room, there was a grey brocade box. After hundreds of years, this brocade box was only a little grey. It seemed like the material used to make the box was not ordinary. However, what did the heavenly sword put in the brocade box, and why did it have to be hidden in such a secret room? Gu Han, I. Seeing the dark hole, Song Ife suddenly thought of countless horror stories. There might be something terrifying hidden in this kind of secret room for hundreds of years. Thinking of this, Song Ife could not help but shiver. She subconsciously wanted to ask Gu Han for help. "I'll go down with you." When Gu Han saw Song Ife's expression, he knew that it was useless to persuade her to go down. Only by going down with her would Song Ife's fear be alleviated. So, without waiting for Song Ife to reply, Gu Han grabbed her waist and jumped down into the secret room. In the end, Gu Han's casual action of grabbing her waist instantly became the best evidence of an ambiguous relationship in the eyes of the two guides. It gave the rumors about Gu Han and Song Ife a vivid and convincing piece of evidence. What the F***ck? A minute later, Gu Han jumped out of the secret room with Song Ife, who was hugging the brocade box, and returned to the ground. At the same time, the management personnel who received the news that the ground on the first floor had been destroyed finally arrived. "Greetings, Lady Yi." These managers were the ones who had personally witnessed the birth of the heavenly sword. They had also witnessed the heavenly sword's terrible and strange temper. Now that they saw the heavenly sword standing here and the huge hole in the ground, even the stupidest person could guess that the hole had a deep connection with the heavenly sword. Dispense with the formalities, dispense with the formalities. This heroine doesn't have that many rules. Yi Tian was all smiles. It seemed like she really enjoyed it. "I built this sword pavilion back then. Now that I want to dig a hole, you guys don't have any objections, right?" The management personnel looked at each other. The sword pavilion was indeed built by Yi Tian and Zhetian Jendi. Logically speaking, it didn't matter if they tore it down, but if they really dug such a big hole, it would be hard to explain. "It's fine. If Lady Yi Tian likes it, the entire sword pavilion can be torn down and rebuilt." At this time, Liu Lei also rushed over with a smile. He was speaking from the bottom of his heart. He had long since disliked the ugly architectural style of the sword pavilion. However, it was a historical site left behind by the ancestors, so he couldn't do anything about it. If the sword lady, Yi Tian, who built the sword pavilion back then, tore it down, that would be perfect. Liu Lei could naturally redesign the sword pavilion. No need, no need. Yi Tian waved her hand. "I'm just taking out the things that were placed here back then." Chapter 292. This was buried when the sword pavilion was established. Liu Lei was taken aback. As the sword pavilion master, it was embarrassing that he didn't know about this. That's right, Yi Tian smiled strangely. He pointed at the brocade box in Song Yifei's hand and said, "Open it and take a look. I promise you'll like it." Song Yifei nodded and opened the brocade box obediently. Everyone's attention was focused on the brocade box. They wanted to see what kind of treasure was inside the brocade box that was buried when the sword pavilion was first established. As a result, when Song Yifei opened the lid of the brocade box, he saw a shiny golden sword on the golden satin. Although it had been buried underground for hundreds of years, the sword still shone with a dazzling golden light. The body of the sword was not long, but it was abnormally thick. There were all kinds of strange words written on it. No one knew what they meant, and no one could recognize them. "This is Sanskrit," Gu Han blurted out when he saw the words on the blade. After a cultural extinction, there were not many people who could recognize Sanskrit. Gu Han had only seen some Sanskrit words in a book. That was how he recognized the words on the sword. However, if Gu Han had to explain the meaning of the Sanskrit, Gu Han would be powerless. "You said it's Sanskrit." Liu Lei's eyes glowed when he heard Gu Han say the word Sanskrit. There are Sanskrit words on the blade. Could it be the extremely rare Buddhist sword mistress? The onlookers were shocked again when they heard Liu Lei say the words Buddhist sword mistress. The Confucian sword mistress, martial arts sword mistress, diabolism sword mistress, martial arts sword mistress, diabolism sword mistress, and martial arts sword mistress were the most common. However, it did not mean that there were no other sword mistresses. It was just that they were very rare. For example, there were only 2 human sword mistresses. 4 Buddhist sword mistresses. Although it was said that there were no less than 10 Buddhist sword mistresses, the truth was that apart from the sword pavilion in Yangjing, none of the other sword pavilions in the 8 base cities could be found. The rarer something was, the greater its value. Every sword pavilion in a base city would dream of owning 1 or 2 swords so that they could show off in front of the sword pavilions in other base cities. He had never expected to find a Buddhist sword mistress hidden in his secret chamber in Yuzhang City. "Come, trust me, hold her." Under Yi Tian's command, Song Yifei stretched out his trembling hand and grabbed the hilt of the Buddhist sword maiden. In an instant, it shone brightly. Just like what Yi Tian said, after 10 years and 38 failures, Song Yifei finally succeeded in synchronizing his first sword maiden. "The sword bearer stays. The rest of you, get out of here." Seeing that Song Yifei had entered the state of nurturing the sword lady, Liu Lei immediately ordered the others to leave, leaving only the sword bearers to form a human wall to protect Song Yifei. Seeing that Song Yifei had succeeded in synchronizing the sword maiden, Yi Tian snickered. He took out his wine gourd, intending to drink another mouthful of fine wine. In the end, something embarrassing happened. There wasn't even a drop of wine left in his gourd. Yi Tian's wine gourd wasn't limitless. Instead, it would slowly recover after a period of time. Even Du Kang wine, which had the fastest recovery rate, needed 3 minutes to recover a mouthful of wine. For a moment, Yi Tian, who had no wine to drink, began to feel uneasy. He jumped left and right like a monkey. "Yi Tian, come here," Gu Han said impatiently when he saw Yi Tian's strange appearance. "What?" "Let me tell you, even though you're this heroine's sword bearer, even though you're quite handsome, even though I don't know what else you can do, this heroine is telling you, don't even think about ordering this heroine around." Yi Tian raised his head and said proudly. Sure enough, this person's personality was exactly the same as in the game. They were both the kind of people who pursued freedom with their eyes on their foreheads. "I told you to come here." Gu Han frowned. This time, he brought along the power of the sword mark. Yi Tian had no choice but to obediently come to Gu Han's side. "Despicable. Shameless. You actually used the power of the sword mark. You sword bearers are all terrible." Yi Tian cursed. In the end, before she could finish speaking, her mouth was stuffed by a cylindrical object. Then, liquid continuously poured into Yi Tian's mouth from this cylindrical object. "You actually dare to stuff this heroine's mouth? Wait, what is this taste?" Yi Tian removed the object stuffed in her mouth and realized that it was a slender wine bottle. The liquid inside had a sweet and sour taste, as well as a rich fragrance of bread. More importantly, this liquid was actually a type of wine. It was a type of wine that Yi Tian had never drunk before. Yi Tian poured a few mouthfuls into her mouth and smacked her lips. She realized that this taste was quite suitable for her. What kind of drink is this? Is it wine? Yi Tian leaned on Guhan and asked. Do you like it? Guhan smiled. This is called kvass. It's a type of wine that came from Moscow. I thought that you might like it, so I brought it for you to try. You specially brought it for me to drink. Yi Tian's eyes blinked. She was a little touched. I don't drink. I know that sword-bearers who don't carry a few bottles of wine with them are not worthy of being your sword-bearer, Yi Tian. Guhan had also learned a lesson from Yi Tian in the game. For a sword mistress like Yi Tian, she would probably only feel that you were her master if you treated her sincerely. Therefore, Guhan had specially bought various brands of wine at the entrance. If you wanted to treat Yi Tian well, you just had to buy wine for her. Yi Tian drank the bottle of kvass in one go. She felt that it was not enough and wanted to ask Guhan for another bottle. In the end, before Yi Tian could say anything, a brand new bottle of kvass was delivered to her. Good brother. Yi Tian was extremely touched. She forcefully punched Guhan's chest. From the moment we entered, you've been my scoundrel friend. She called him her scoundrel friend in front of her scoundrel friend. Yi Tian was really a scoundrel friend. While Guhan and Yi Tian were interacting and trying to get closer to each other, Song Yifei had just finished synchronizing. A ball of light emerged from Song Yifei's stomach. After some transformation, a little nun suddenly appeared. Oh, that's right. A little nun had indeed appeared. She wore a monk's robe and carried a long sword on her back. She also wore a nun's hat on her head. She looked like a nun through and through. But after thinking about it carefully, this was very normal. A sword mistress dressed like a nun. What was so strange about that? The only thing that made people curious was that the nun's hat covered most of her head. It was unknown if there was hair under the hat or if she was completely bald. Amitabha. This poor nun, Bo Ri, pays her respects to Lord Swordsman, so this sword mistress was called Bo Ri, which meant Bo Ri sword. Even the name sounded very Buddhist. Amitabha. Hello. Immeasurable deity. Seeing the first sword mistress in his life, Song Yifei had mixed feelings. He had finally become a swordsman. He didn't think that the turning point of his life would come so suddenly and catch him unprepared. TSK, little nun, seeing this heroine, why aren't you saluting? Yi Tian's face was a little red after drinking a top-grade kvass. She looked like she wanted to cause trouble. Amitabha. Benefactor Yi Tian, this poor nun salutes you. Hearing Yi Tian say this sword mistress called Bo Ri also very naturally saluted Yi Tian. She was very well behaved. There was no fault to be found in her behavior. Hey! When did this little nun's personality change? Yi Tian couldn't help but be surprised when he saw how obedient Bo Ri was. This little nun's temper wasn't like this in the past. Amitabha. Being locked up in this sunless underground place by benefactor Yi Tian, no matter how fiery one's temper is, it will still be worn down. During these past few hundred years, I've been comprehending the Buddhist Dharma in my dreams and have already comprehended the essence of the Buddhist Tao. I won't bother about this grudge with benefactor Yi Tian anymore. When Hanya spoke, she had a look of great enlightenment. However, the information contained in her words shocked everyone. From what Bo Ri said, it seemed that Yi Tian had imprisoned her here. Thinking about it carefully, didn't Yi Tian imprison Bo Ri? Under normal circumstances, Bo Ri should have been placed in a public place for those who were fated to come here to choose from. However, Yi Tian placed Bo Ri in an underground secret room and didn't tell anyone about it. Thus, Bo Ri had been hidden underground for more than 700 years. Wasn't this a disguised form of imprisonment? If luck was on her side, she could have appeared 10 times in these 700 years. Boring. When I helped you release him, I still wanted you to fight with me again. Who would have thought that your personality would actually change now? Boring, really boring. Yi Tian shook his head. In this day and age, it's so difficult to find an evenly matched opponent. Amitabha. Sword Tao is a minor Tao. Buddhism is the true Tao. Bo Ri didn't care about the dust on the surface. If benefactor Yi Tian wants to spar, you should find someone else. Forgive me for not keeping you company. Bo Ri directly rejected. Pavilion Master, if I remember correctly, Lady Yi Tian's swordsmanship is ranked first among treasured swords and third among famed sword. This Bo Ri sword is actually comparable to Lady Yi Tian's swordsmanship. Doesn't that mean that the Bo Ri sword is ranked third among famed swords? She's just an ancient sword maiden. A spirit sword wielder asked Liu Lei. He couldn't understand. Among the ancient sword maidens, was there a sword maiden that could match up to the heavenly sword? Bo Ri sword. Liu Lei didn't answer the spirit sword wielder's question. He fell into deep thought. The name Bo Ri sword had evoked some information from the depths of his memory. In the vast amount of information in Sword Pavilion, there was very little information about the Bo Ri sword. It was to the extent that Liu Lei had to recall it for over 10 minutes before he could recall it. Bo Ri sword. I see. Chapter 293. In Liu Lei's memory, there was a story about Prajna. Legend has it that before the heaven-shrouding sword emperor became a sword emperor and was still a heaven-shrouding sword immortal, he and another sword immortal had no choice but to fight. This was because Zhe Tianjiandi's celestial sword was the Yuan killer sword, and the other sword immortal's celestial sword was the Avici sword. The Yuan killer sword and the Avici sword were one. If Zhe Tian wanted to become an emperor sword wielder, he had to obtain the Avici sword and combine the two swords into one to become an emperor sword wielder. At that time, humanity was in the midst of the first difficult sword era. Any immortal sword wielder was a valuable combat force. Heaven-shrouding sword immortal and another sword immortal agreed to have 3 matches at the peak of Sanqing Mountain. Each side would send out 3 sword maidens of the same level to fight one-on-one. The one who won 2 battles would be the final winner. The loser would allow the other to cut the sword mark of the celestial sword without resistance. The 2 sides didn't inform anyone of this battle, so naturally, no one went to watch. Later generations only knew that after they fought for 5 days at the peak of Sanqing Mountain, Zhe Tian's sword returned to Yangjing City with the Yuan killer sword and the Avici sword. He fought with Yuan Ku for 49 days. On the last day, he combined the 2 swords and became an emperor in battle. He became the 3rd human Jendi. He killed the universe-level Yuan Ku and the universe-level Yuan Ku, which scared the Yuan Ku away. They didn't dare to go near Yangjing City for the next 10 years. Later on, in order to quell the first difficult sword era, the heaven-shrouding sword emperor directly rushed to the Eastern Heavenly Court and killed the master of the Heavenly Court at that time, the desolate grade Yuan Ying, Eastern sovereign Tai Yi, with his sword. The world trembled because of this, and the Eastern Heavenly Court even closed the Southern Heavenly Gate for 40 years. They only dared to come out after the heaven-shrouding sword emperor ascended. Zhe Tianjiandi's glorious life was celebrated by many, but there was no news of the sword immortal who fought with Zhe Tianjiendi for 5 days and 5 nights. In the end, even his name and title were never passed down. It was a tragedy. But after Zhe Tianjiendi established Yuzhong headquarter city, he wrote a memoir of less than 3,000 words. This essay had never been made public, and only the sword immortals of Yuzhong had the right to read it. No one else knew of its existence. In the prose, it was mentioned that this sword immortal had an ancient sword-class Buddhist sword maiden so powerful that even heaven-shrouding Jendi was left speechless. Its name was the Wisdom Sword. The original text of his recollections was like this: if I did not rely on heaven to fight to the death, I would not be able to defeat Prajna, and then I would no longer have the name of covering the sky in this world. If one fully understood the meaning of this sentence, it meant that if it wasn't for the heavenly sword fighting to the death, then heaven-covering Jendi would have been defeated by Hanya. If Prajna won, then the one who lost the duel would be Zhe Tianjendi. From then on, the name Zhe Tianjendi would no longer exist. When Liu Lei first read this essay, he didn't understand why Heavenly Reliance was able to defeat Hanya in a desperate battle. The Heavenly Sword was clearly a treasured sword maiden, while Hanya was only an ancient sword maiden. The two sword maidens were not even on the same level. Unless the wielder of the Prajna sword was out of his mind, he wouldn't let his ancient sword lady fight against the number one treasure sword, the heavenly sword. However, from the meaning behind Heavenly Reliance's words, it seemed that Heavenly Reliance had indeed fought against the Great Wisdom Sword, and Heavenly Reliance had emerged victorious in the end. In that case, didn't that mean that a mere ancient sword rank Great Wisdom Sword really had the strength to rival the first treasured sword? In that case, wouldn't the Great Wisdom Sword replace the Yi Celestial Sword on the spot and become the number one ancient sword rank Great Wisdom Sword? However, all of these were just guesses. Perhaps only Yi Tian and Bo Ri, who were present at the scene, knew the truth. Amitabha, Ife, let's go. I don't want to stay here anymore. It's too noisy here. Help me build a temple so I can have some peace. After speaking, Hanya walked out of the sword pavilion. Song Ife originally wanted to say a few more words to Guhan and Heavenly Reliance to thank them for their help. However, it seemed that it was impossible now. Song Ife could only bow to Guhan and Heavenly Reliance before following Hanya out of the sword pavilion. Seems like little nun Hanya's temper hasn't changed. She's still so petty. Heavenly Reliance looked at Hanya's robes that were fluttering in the wind and revealed a smile. After more than 700 years of rest, it seems like Lady Hanya has learned to endure more. Guhan stood next to Heavenly Reliance and placed a bottle of kvass in her hands. How about it? Is there anything else you want to do here? If not, let's go home. Go home. Hearing these two words, Heavenly Reliance's expression changed. In the end, she shook her head and sighed. I don't have a home. To me, no matter how good a home is, it can't compare to a shabby wine shop. Then I'll build a wine shop for you. Guhan looked into Heavenly Reliance's eyes and said calmly. All right. Heavenly Reliance thought about it and drank another bottle of kvass. Give me a few thousand bottles of this and put them in the wine shop. These two sword ladies, one wanted a temple and the other wanted a wine shop. In a sense, they were a perfect match. It's here, it's here. Yi Si shifted her gaze to Fleeting Ling and Shu Tianyuan, who were leading a group of swordsmen, surrounded a barren rock on Changyang Mountain. Fleeting Ling, who looked like a scientist, had a strange helmet on his head. There were wires connected to the helmet, and at the other end of the wires was a machine the size of a car. Dr. Fan, are you sure it's here? Shu Tianyuan found it hard to hide the excitement in his heart. After working hard for a few nights and being afraid for a few nights, he finally found the location of that thing. The scientist excitedly said, "It's right, there's no mistake. When my strong ion signal passed through this rock, it encountered an extremely powerful resistance. This means that there must be an item that can isolate the strong ion signal here. In this world, aside from that thing, there is nothing else." Good. 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 Even with Shu Tianyuan's shrewdness, he still said good 3 times. It seemed like he valued the item here very much. Suddenly, Liuyan Ling blurted out, "TCH, why did I hear that apart from that thing, there is another item that can isolate your strong ion signal?" When the scientist heard this, his expression changed drastically. As a scientist, even though he knew that this lady had an extraordinary background, he still had to refute her loudly. That's impossible. In this world, apart from that thing, what else can block my signal? There is no such thing in this world. TSK, you are really confident. Then let me ask you. Can your strong ion signal pass through a dimensional rift? Liuyan Ling asked with a face full of smiles. Then, the scientist instantly became speechless. Liuyan Ling was right. His strong ion signal could not possibly penetrate a dimensional rift. All right, Ling, I know you don't want to come here with me, and I didn't want to bring you here. If it wasn't for Uncle Liu Nian's secret order to bring you along, I wouldn't have bothered to bring you here. I would have let you stay with that man of yours. Shu Tianyuan smiled bitterly. Even so, you don't have to be so sarcastic to Professor Fan. Everyone knows that dimensional rifts can intercept strong ions, or rather, all ion quarks cannot escape from dimensional rifts. However, how can a dimensional rift exist within a mountain wall? Who knows what is going on in this world? Liu Ling said this and did not say anything else. She also knew that her previous rebuttal was purely unreasonable. Her patience had been worn out after such a long period of time. In comparison, arguing with that brat Guhan was much more interesting. Do it. After appeasing Liu Ling, Shu Tianyuan ordered his subordinates to take action. A few sword-bearers in the form of sword ladies inserted their swords into the rocks. These sword-bearers were all treasure sword-bearers. Although the treasure sword ladies in their hands were man-made, they were more than enough to deal with these rocks. Then, as if they were cutting tofu, the rocks were sliced off one by one. In less than a few minutes, the huge rock was cut into a cave that could accommodate 2 people walking side by side at the same time. Dr. Fan kept looking at the data on the instrument and said, "Soon, it's just in front." In a moment of excitement, it was inevitable that some people would let their guard down. For example, the sword-bearers in front of them were tasked with cutting down the mountain wall in front of them and passing it to the sword-bearers behind him. However, when he looked at the rock in front of him and turned around to pass it to the sword-bearers behind him, suddenly, a big hairy palm reached out from the hole he had just cut and hit the sword-bearer's neck. The unlucky sword-bearer's protective shield instantly shattered. He did not even have time to summon a sword lady before his neck was broken by the black beast. His head tilted to one side and he died. Second bro, what happened to you, second bro? Everything happened so quickly that the other sword-bearer, who was a brother to the dead sword-bearer, did not even see what happened. As a result, he made a huge mistake. He did not escape immediately, but chose to pull the fallen sword-bearer. As a result, a few seconds later, the black hand that attacked once again broke his neck. In an instant, Shu Tianyuan's team lost 2 sword-bearers who were at the level of treasured swords. Danger, retreat, retreat. The rest of the sword-bearers finally reacted and escaped from the hole like a tide. Shu Tianyuan and Liu Ling, who were observing from the outside, realized that something was wrong. They ordered the remaining sword-bearers to release their sword ladies and set up a formation. Then, they surrounded the hole that had taken the lives of the 2 sword-bearers. Awoo! Shu Tianyuan's face was instantly covered in sweat when he heard such a loud roar coming from the hole. My dear Miss Ling, what kind of mouth is that? Why is there a meteor-grade earth bear in there? Chapter 294. Deep into the night, Guhan was meditating alone in the training room. His body had been remodeled, and he needed to reopen the meridians that had been remodeled in order to recover his original fighting strength. This was a task that Guhan had to complete with all his might. Before he recovered his strength, Guhan did not plan on leaving the city to fight with Yuan Ku. According to Guhan's estimation, this process would take about a month. Compared to his first time cultivating for more than 10 years, this 1 month was already very fast. Let us live freely in the world of mortals. Ride a horse and share the prosperity of the world. Sing the joy in our hearts to wine, and enjoy our youth with vigor. Just as Guhan was about to reopen the meridian in his feet and was about to reopen the next meridian, a ghostly wail came from next door. I'll endure it. Guhan frowned and planned to ignore this voice. Unfortunately, this voice did not know how to restrain itself. Instead, it became louder and louder. Gradually, it was as if the entire roof was going to collapse. Guhan might be able to endure this kind of voice, but others might not. After the voice wreaked havoc for a while, Guhan's door began to knock madly. In this era where technology was so advanced, knocking on the door was no longer a traditional way of life. If you wanted to enter a stranger's house, you could do it through the convenient neighbor communication system. For someone to knock on Guhan's door like this, it meant that the person must be in a very angry state. As expected, when Guhan opened the door, he saw a few angry faces. Guhan's neighbors from several floors had all come. They came to knock on Guhan's door for no other reason than to complain to Guhan about the ghostly wail. These neighbors were very friendly and said that if they did not want to be reported to the discipline committee, they should quickly shut up. After sending these crazy neighbors away, Guhan could only helplessly walk into a room. He saw Yi Tian alone, holding a microphone and screaming at the television screen. If voices could kill, then Yi Tian would have already killed everyone on the entire floor. Guhan, You're here. Have a drink with Qingpin. Suddenly, a small body jumped into Guhan's arms, and the smell of alcohol assaulted Guhan's breath. Guhan lowered his head and saw a blushing little Qingpin looking at Guhan with a silly smile. Her whole body was hot, and obviously, she was drunk. Let us be free and unrestrained, with joy in our hearts. Even in her drunken state, Qingpin skillfully climbed onto Guhan's neck, then sat on it and sang loudly with her immature voice. Logically speaking, Qingpin's singing was much better than Yi Tian's, even if Qingpin's off-key was even worse than Yi Tian's. Guhan walked to Yi Tian's side in 2 or 3 steps, pressed the remote control, and the whole world instantly became quiet. What are you doing? Are you rebelling? Yi Tian saw that Guhan had turned off her television, and immediately became anxious. Without the lyrics and music accompaniment, how was she going to sing? You've already disturbed the people. If you don't want to be locked up in the discipline committee's jail with me, then I'll have to trouble Lady Yi Tian to rest for a while. Guhan said expressionlessly. TSK, the discipline committee's jail was built by this heroine. I've left more than 10 secret doors in there. If I go in today, I can slip out tomorrow. What's there to be afraid of? Yi Tian said disdainfully. I'm very sorry, Lady Yi Tian. The discipline committee's jail was already destroyed during the last difficult sword era. If you live in there now, I guarantee that you won't be able to find the secret door even after a year. That's right, that place was built purely with dimensional crystals. Before I reach spirit sword rank, you won't be able to come out. How about this? This is more troublesome. Why don't we find a chance to talk to the neighbors, and let them sing to their heart's content with me, and form a community singing group? Yi Tian thought of a seemingly good idea. If that's the case, the entire district will ask to lock us in there. A few black lines appeared on Guhan's forehead. What a bummer. Yi Tian yawned, then hugged Kvass and took another big gulp. This little lowly of yours is really useless. She's drunk like this in less than a bottle of Kvass. I was planning to groom her to become my successor. Imagining Qingpin turning into Yi Tian, Guhan couldn't help but shiver. He had to think of a way to restrict Yi Tian, or else the whole house would be turned into a puddle of dirty water by Yi Tian. It was also at this time that a message was sent to Guhan's personal terminal. It was sent by Bright Moon from back then, and it said very simply, Guhan, do you have time? My brother wants to see you in the game. Seeing this message, Guhan had an idea. Yi Tian, I want to go into the game for a while. Do you want to go in with me? Guhan asked. Game? What's that? Can I go in? Then I want to go in and take a look. As expected, when she heard something new, Yi Tian couldn't suppress her curiosity. As long as Yi Tian entered the game, it would be easy. In the game, Yi Tian could sing whatever she wanted, and it wouldn't affect anyone. He handed the drunk little drunkard Qingpin to Wen Maiyun and asked her to take care of Qingpin while he slept. However, Wen Maiyun was also very busy. Tonight, Jiu Yun sneaked into the fish tank while Guhan was meditating. In the end, she knocked over the fish tank, and the entire kitchen was in a mess. Seeing that Wen Maiyun, who was sweating profusely, hadn't finished cleaning up the mess in the kitchen, Guhan suddenly felt that it was time to add a helper to Wen Maiyun. Anyway, he had already become a sword wielder. Not only could he go to the maid center to get an exclusive maid, but it seemed like he could also change to a bigger house. Forget it, he would think about these things in the future. It was better to enter the game first. When Guhan opened his eyes again, he was already in the game. Guhan set the online location to be his bedroom, but why? Why was Queen Yu lying on his bed? Seeing Queen Yu sleeping soundly on his bed, Guhan's heart ached. At this moment, Queen Yu was lying on his bed. She wasn't covered with a blanket, and her pajamas weren't neatly worn either. A large area of her snow-white skin was exposed. If Guhan adjusted his angle, he could even see Queen Yu's pair of white rabbits. Alright, it seemed to be a little off-topic. The reason why Guhan's heart ached was because of the 2 tear stains on Queen Yu's cheeks. She probably cried to sleep. Why was she crying? Was it because he hadn't gone online to see her for more than a week? In fact, he had returned to the city the night before yesterday, which meant that he could go online the night before yesterday. However, because of Jiu Yun and Qingpin, Guhan threw the contents of the game to the side and didn't consider the in-game Queen Yu. "Guhan, I'm going to kill you," Queen Yu muttered in the dream, "but why does killing you hurt so much?" "I won't kill you, okay?" Sigh, it seems like the famed sword girl can only give up on the 3-foot sword. Hearing Queen Yu's words, Guhan silently made this decision. According to Guhan's original plan, the famed sword girl should have synchronized with the number 1 famed sword, the 3-foot sword, just like the number 1 treasured sword, the heavenly sword. However, seeing Queen Yu like this, if he chose the 3-foot sword in real life, Queen Yu would definitely go crazy. Guhan smiled bitterly. What damned 3-foot sword? He didn't care. He had to make up for the sins he committed. Back then, he killed Kanzu with 1 strike and used the grafting technique to snatch Queen Yu from him. Now, it was time for him to return the favor. Guhan sat next to Queen Yu and caressed her white and tender face. A certain lock in his heart was suddenly released. Originally, the balance in Guhan's heart was infinitely tilted towards revenge and darkness. But now, this balance was balanced. On the other side of the balance was a pile of sword girls. Guhan was no longer the Guhan of the past. The original Guhan would only make the choice that was most beneficial to him. Now, Guhan would only make the choice that was most beneficial to his sword girl. Perhaps this was growth. Jiu Han, what's going on? Why are there so many strange things in my head? Jiu Han thought to himself. I actually wanted to woo an ugly guy with a face full of scars. How strange. After Yi Tian entered the game with Jiu Han, she felt that there were a lot of memories in her head. These memories were so inexplicable, and they were all about an ugly person with a face full of scars. This made Yi Tian feel that she couldn't accept it. She was clearly a senior member of the Appearance Association. This is normal. It's a basic phenomenon of retrieving consciousness fragments. Is there a problem? Guhan turned around and looked at Yi Tian strangely. What? Why is an ugly guy like you here? Guhan had been giving Yi Tian his back, but when he turned around, his face was full of scars. Yi Tian was shocked. Wasn't this that disgusting, ugly guy with scars? Ugly guy. Guhan realized that Yi Tian was probably referring to the scars on his face. Guhan touched the scars on his face. The knot in his heart had been resolved. Perhaps it was time to remove these scars. This wouldn't do. His face in the game was exactly the same as his face in real life. There were no adjustments. Once he removed the scars, he would probably be exposed in real life. It was better to forget about it. I'm your sword wielder, Guhan. I just made some changes to myself in the game. Oh, now I'm called military governor. Don't call me by the wrong name. Guhan glanced at Yi Tian. What? Heroine Yi Tian is afraid of a face with scars? How is that possible? Yi Tian said heavily. It's just too ugly. You'll have to slowly get used to it. Guhan snorted coldly. All right, I don't care about that. Let me ask you. Why are there so many strange memories in my mind after entering the game? What the hell is this place? This is the game world. Those memories are fragments of your consciousness. How could you not know this? Didn't you split those fragments of consciousness on your own accord? Jiu Han's words were stuck at this point. He realized a huge problem. Sword Maiden Online was created 200 years ago, and Yi Tian's first awakening was something that happened 350 years ago. Yi Tian was just like her performance. She didn't even know that there was such a thing as Sword Maiden Online in this world, because in these 200 years, Yi Tian had always been sleeping in Jiang'e. Then the problem was, how did the fragments of Yi Tian's consciousness appear in the game world? Did she see a ghost? Chapter 295. Yi Tian swore that he had been in a deep sleep for the past 350 years and had not woken up at all. Therefore, it was impossible for him to split a fragment of his consciousness. That was impossible. However, Jiu Han didn't believe this. The game had been released 200 years ago, and the fragments of consciousness in the game had truly come from Heavenly Sword's soul. The moment the fragments of consciousness entered Heavenly Sword's body was proof. If it didn't come from Heavenly Sword's own consciousness, then it was impossible for it to enter Heavenly Sword's consciousness. One insisted that she hadn't woken up for 350 years, while the other had Yi Tian's consciousness fragments. This was a very interesting thing. There must be something interesting going on. Gu Han had a guess. Yi Tian had woken up once in the past 350 years, but for some reason, she had deleted all her memories of waking up. This was not impossible. If she encountered something that she didn't want to remember in a lifetime, then before she fell into a deep sleep, the Sword Lady could delete all her memories of that lifetime. It was just like formatting a computer, very convenient. Alright, Ji Han would definitely look into the things inside. There were some things that were better off not knowing than knowing. How is it? Have you sorted out those memories? Yi Tian sat on the chair. This was her sorting out Yi Tian's memories in the game. This was the first time Gu Han saw Yi Tian so quiet since he knew her. Yes, everything's sorted out. So this is how the game world works. Yi Tian smiled curiously. This was the first time she understood the game world of Sword Lady Online. To her, everything in this world was so novel. Hey, Gu Han, let's go and clear the dungeon. After Yi Tian understood this world, she couldn't wait to clear the dungeon. This was very normal. It was like a player who had just bought a phone and couldn't help but install a lot of apps in it. Yi Tian, why are you so noisy? You're killing me. Whether it was in the game or in reality, Yi Tian's voice was always the loudest. During the few days that Gu Han wasn't around, Yu Wang deeply understood this point. So she cursed in dissatisfaction and got up from the bed indifferently. As a result, Gu Han was instantly dumbfounded. Yu Wang's lower body was completely bare under the blanket. She was only wearing a shirt. Other than that, there was nothing else. Yu Wang didn't notice that Gu Han was beside her, so she wanted to kick Yi Tian's head. In the end, the beautiful scene between her legs flashed in Gu Han's eyes. Immediately, Ji Han felt his mouth go dry, and his entire body was burning with desire. Although his body had been reconstructed, and the meridians of the 9 swords of mysterious heaven had to be reopened, the 3 green lotus swords that he had practiced for a period of time did not seem to be affected at all. Once Ji Han received the slightest bit of stimulation, he would explode with a great desire, and this desire would become stronger and stronger, becoming harder and harder to control. Cough cough. Although Yu Wang's beauty disappeared in a flash, her pair of slender, snow-white legs were still swaying in front of Gu Han. Just looking at these legs that could be played with for a year, Gu Han's willpower almost couldn't suppress that desire. So, Gu Han could only cough twice to remind Yu Wang to be careful. Where did that cough come from? Yu Wang turned around in confusion and saw the flushed Gu Han staring at her. Then, Yu Wang's face froze in a daze. Her body began to fight and curl up. Because her body was curling up and fighting, the loose shirt could no longer support her slender body and the entire shirt slipped down. Hands as soft as a feather, skin as smooth as cream, collar like a butterfly, teeth like a rhinoceros. Thin silk and smooth skin. Skin as smooth as jade. Okay, these 2 lines of poetry suddenly appeared in Gu Han's mind. He felt that this was the best portrayal of Yu Wang. But it was really strange. Gu Han clearly had no interest in poetry and had never seen those things before. I'm going out. Gu Han felt that he couldn't suppress the desire in his body anymore. If he continued to look, he would probably pounce on Yu Wang and then Yu Wang will probably stab himself to death with a sword. Gu Han thought to himself. After Gu Han escaped from the room, he immediately ran to the bathroom and took a cold shower to calm down his desire. After Gu Han calmed down, he discovered something strange. Although he had a reaction when he was intimate with Wen Maiyun in the bath, it definitely wasn't as strong as when he saw Yu Wang's body. This urge to turn into a wolf and do some beastly things was something he had never experienced before. Wait, when he faced Artoria, this urge also appeared once, but it wasn't as strong as it was today. Could it be that the after-effects of 3 green lotus swords only worked on the Sword Lady? Tens of minutes later, Gu Han, Yi Tian, and Yu Wang sat in the main hall of the house. Although this courtyard, which was modeled after the style of the wealthy people in Jiangnan during the Ming dynasty, was expensive, it was truly expensive. The entire main hall was richly decorated with dragons and phoenixes, giving off an extraordinary aura. There were also 2 NPC maids standing by Guhan's side, serving him like a tycoon. However, among the 3 people sitting on the chairs, only Guhan, who was sitting upright and still, had the air of a master. The other 2 beautiful women didn't seem to have the awareness of a wife at all. One crossed her legs and looked around with interest, while the other kept her head down, refusing to raise it no matter what. Yu Wang, what happened just now? Guhan wanted to tell Yu Wang not to take it to heart, but before he could finish, Yu Wang suddenly raised his head and stared at Guhan's face, gritting his teeth as he said, "Nothing happened just now, you didn't see anything." "What did you say? What happened just now?" "I just entered the game." Guhan took advantage of the situation and continued Yu Wang's words. Although he looked like an ostrich doing this, Yu Wang let out a sigh of relief. As long as he didn't say anything, he would probably forget about it. Yu Wang thought to himself. Okay, let me get down to business. Yi Tian just entered the game world and wants to experience the instance dungeon, so I plan to meet up with Yao Guang later. I'll bring you guys to a small instance dungeon, so prepare yourselves. Guhan said. Just entered the game? Yu Wang didn't understand. Why did Yi Tian just enter the game? She was a sword maiden in the game, how could she leave the game? Oh, Yu Wang, I forgot to tell you. I've already become a treasured sword wielder in the real world, and I've successfully synchronized with Yi Tian in the real world. What you see now isn't the original Yi Tian, but the Yi Tian that has fused with the consciousness fragments. So that's how it is. When Yu Wang heard this, his hands started to tremble. I clearly came first. What do you mean? Guhan was stunned. Yu Wang's clearly came first was a bit strange. What did she come first? I clearly came first. Yu Wang kept repeating this sentence in his heart. She clearly became Guhan's sword maiden first, and Yi Tian clearly came later than her. But why did Yi Tian meet up with Guhan in the real world first, while she was still waiting in the game? She clearly came first. Thinking of this, Yu Wang's heart was in so much pain that he wished he was dead. Sigh, she didn't even think about it. She was a famous sword maiden. Before Guhan synchronized with a treasured sword, he wouldn't be able to synchronize with her no matter what. Yu Wang, are you alright? Yi Tian, who had fused with the consciousness fragments, could roughly guess what Yu Wang was thinking. She giggled and asked Yi Tian, "That's right, let me tell you, Guhan is really handsome in the real world. His face is so white, just looking at him makes me want to kiss him." Alright, Yi Tian's suicidal words completely ignited a certain chord in Yu Wang's heart. She suddenly stood up. "Guhan, I'm not feeling well today. You and Yi Tian go do dungeons, I'll stay at home and not go anywhere." With that, Yu Wang ran away. He was about to end up like those melodramatic dramas. Unfortunately, Guhan didn't like these useless dramas. Before Yu Wang could run out of the hall, Guhan's heart moved. "Yu Wang, come back." Yu Wang's running moans stopped, and then her feet involuntarily retreated until she retreated in front of Guhan. "Yu Wang, sit down," Guhan ordered again. Then, Yu Wang sat on Guhan's lap. "You're not allowed to stay anywhere today. You're coming with me to the dungeon." Guhan paused and saw that Yu Wang's face was still ashen and miserable. Her body was also very stiff. It seemed like she was still resisting Guhan's orders. Helpless, Guhan added, "Without you, the dungeon doesn't have any meaning." Hearing Ji Yu Han say this, King Yu's body softened. His body was no longer stiff, his face was no longer pale, and his mouth was no longer tightly shut. Thousands of words converged into one sentence. Annoying. Don't misunderstand, these words weren't said by King Yu, but by Yi Tian. She couldn't stand the lovey-dovey couple in front of her anymore. She walked out of the hall with large strides and left behind these harsh words. "I'll give you guys 10 minutes. If you don't come out in 10 minutes, I'll go play in the dungeon by myself. You can't do anything by yourself. Without my control, you won't even be able to leave this sword tomb." Guhan silently retorted. "Let's go now. How could Queen Yu have the face to stay here for another 10 minutes? She immediately stood up from Ji Yu Han's body and chased after Yi Tian. Annoying. Guess who said that hateful sentence? Chapter 296. Before going to the dungeon, Guhan had to make a trip to Yaoguang. A few minutes after Guhan entered the game, Yaoguang's invitation was sent to Guhan's personal terminal. Clearly, he had a very strong need for Guhan. The adjective was not quite right. Therefore, after appeasing King Yu and Heavenly, Guhan brought the two of them to Yaoguang's encampment. Heavenly had no interest in such a dirty deal, so she forcefully dragged King Yu to the tavern in the encampment for a drink. Therefore, Guhan entered Yaoguang's meeting room alone. It was the same meeting room that he had talked to Yaoguang after clearing the dungeon. At this time, Yaoguang was already waiting in the meeting room. Looking at the empty teacup in front of Yaoguang, it seemed that Yaoguang had been waiting for Guhan for a long time. Did sect leader Yaoguang wait for a long time? Guhan sat opposite Yaoguang and asked with a smile. It's all right, it's only been an hour, Yaoguang replied without changing his expression. Looks like sect leader Yaoguang has been very relaxed recently. It's my honor that you can wait for me for an hour. After Guhan finished speaking, two NPC maidservants placed a cup of tea in front of Guhan and filled Yaoguang's cup. Guhan took a sip. Let's skip the small talk. Sect leader Yaoguang asked me to come here in such a hurry. What's the matter? Our challenge with eternal autumn water has been brought forward. Yaoguang drank the tea that he had just poured. Brought forward? Brought forward when? According to the original plan, Yaoguang would challenge everlasting autumn water in a month's time. There were about 20 days left until then. The day after tomorrow. Yaoguang was silent for a while, then spat out the time. The day after tomorrow. Even with Guhan's shrewdness, he couldn't help but look surprised. What kind of joke was this? The original 1 month's time had been shortened by 20 days. This was equivalent to reducing the mobilization time and logistical preparation time of a large-scale war by more than half. If you reduced the mobilization time of World War I and World War II by half, let's see if Germany would be defeated. These 20 days were very important for Yaoguang's sword faction. They had to make plans, arrange manpower, and prepare various battle resources. In short, without these 20 days, Yaoguang's sword faction's chances of winning had dropped by at least 40%. Can't it be a few more days? The battle is going to start the day after tomorrow. Many of your sword faction members probably have their own plans or are not online at all. Whether you can gather half of your members by the day after tomorrow is a problem. Guhan couldn't help but remind Yaoguang. I have no choice. The battle has to start the day after tomorrow. If possible, I would even like to start the battle tomorrow. Yaoguang looked helpless. It was obvious that he wasn't prepared for such an outcome. He hadn't expected it. Did something happen? Seeing Yaoguang's expression, Guhan knew that Yaoguang was forced to make such a decision. How could a smart person like him do such a stupid thing? Take a guess. Yaoguang suddenly wanted to keep him in suspense and play the traditional game of you guess with Ji Yu Han. It was probably because Ji Yu Han had directly seen through his plan to challenge Everlasting Autumn Water's position as one of the 10 great sects last time, so he felt a little unreconciled and wanted to regain some face and so on. Childish. Guhan snorted coldly. The word childish made Yaoguang feel embarrassed. Damn it, this is indeed a little childish. Forget it, childish it is. If you, military governor, can't guess it, I can at least feel better. However, guessing and what not had always been Guhan's forte. There's nothing to guess. You suddenly brought forward the time of attack. It's nothing more than a sudden change that forced you to bring forward the time. Guhan analyzed slowly. Such a change can only come from two possibilities. Either your Yaoguang sword faction has become weaker, or Everlasting Autumn Water has become stronger. On my way here, I noticed that there are a lot more people in your Yaoguang sword faction than before. The members' faces are also filled with excitement. It seems that because of the first clear of the instance dungeon and the defeat of Great Waves, your sword faction has gained a lot of new blood. Right now, Yaoguang's sword faction should be on the rise. It's impossible for their strength to decline. Then, the problem lies with Everlasting Autumn Water. Everlasting Autumn Water must have become stronger as well. If a sword faction wants to become stronger, The simplest way is to add a large number of experts. Given the complicated relationship between the eternal autumn water and the Great Waves of Storm's founder, it was normal for the Great Waves of Storm to lend eternal autumn water a hand at a critical moment. Moreover, the Great Waves of Storm's victory was built on the Great Waves of Storm's failure. The Great Waves of Storm wanted revenge even in his dreams. And the best way for them to take revenge on Yaoguang's sword faction is to make you fail this challenge and make you spit out everything you got from them. So, I think you should have noticed that a large number of experts from Great Waves of Storm have started to withdraw from Great Waves of Storm sword faction. Great Waves of Storm sword faction is famous for being difficult to join. It's not normal for so many experts to withdraw. The higher-ups of Great Waves of Storm sword faction must have given the order for these experts to withdraw from the faction. Then, they will have to let these experts join Everlasting Autumn Water. That way, Everlasting Autumn Water's strength will skyrocket to the point where your Yaoguang sword faction will not be able to defeat them. Fortunately, there is a 72-hour cooldown period after withdrawing from the sect. Those experts will have to wait for 72 hours before they can join Everlasting Autumn Water. These 72 hours are your only chance. If you can't defeat Everlasting Autumn Water within these 72 hours, your Yaoguang sword faction will have no chance of defeating Everlasting Autumn Water at all. Oh, right. This 72-hour cooldown period starts from the moment those experts withdraw from the sect. I don't know when they did that, but it's clear that you no longer have 72 hours. If that's the case, I'm afraid you can't wait to challenge Everlasting Autumn Water right now, right? Starting the battle the day after tomorrow should be the time you calculated several times, right? You must have omitted all the time that you could possibly spare to obtain the most optimal time. In other words, when the time comes, you will only have around 30 hours to truly challenge Everlasting Autumn Water. That's quite a tight schedule. Yaoguang, you sure have a big heart. It's truly beyond my expectations. Guhan went through the series of analysis without pausing, scaring Yaoguang so much that he nearly dropped the teacup in his hand. Military governor, are you even human? Yaoguang's face looked as though he had just seen a ghost. Looks like I guessed right. Tell me, then. What's the exact situation? I'm all ears. Guhan shut his mouth and waited for Yaoguang to speak. Hehe, does this count as me asking to be humiliated? Yaoguang sighed. You guessed right. 2 hours ago, I received information from an insider in Great Waves of Ocean Waves. Approximately 5,000 elite swordbearers had withdrawn from Yaoguang's sword sect at the same time. At first, I couldn't understand it. It was only when I linked it to Everlasting Autumn Water that I realized it. My plan to challenge Everlasting Autumn Water must have been leaked, or perhaps it wasn't leaked at all. Wonderbrush really knows me better than anyone. He must have guessed that I would be interested in Everlasting Autumn Water. When Yaoguang mentioned Wonderbrush, his tone was rather subtle. This former enemy of Yaoguang's sword sect had now become Yaoguang's strongest enemy. If I were you, I would give up on this challenge. Guhan ignored the ugly expression on Yaoguang's face when he heard this. If Great Waves of Ocean Waves only wanted to support Everlasting Autumn Water, there would be no need for them to make such a big fuss. The best way would be to arrange for a small number of their members to withdraw from the sect and enter Everlasting Autumn Water every day. As long as they enter Everlasting Autumn Water silently, unless your insider has become a high-level character, it would be impossible for them to discover such information. But now, Great Waves of Ocean Waves is doing the exact opposite, arranging for 5,000 people to withdraw in such a big fuss. This means that Great Waves of Ocean Waves is doing this on purpose for you to see, to tell you, Yaoguang, that I'm going to support Everlasting Autumn Water. You only have 72 hours left. If you don't act now, you will never have the chance to challenge Everlasting Autumn Water. Guhan continued to analyze. Great Waves of Ocean Waves is forcing you to make a choice. Are you going to attack within 72 hours, or are you going to give up on your ambitions for Everlasting Autumn Water? If you give up on your ambitions, then Great Waves of Ocean Waves will be able to protect Everlasting Autumn Water and achieve their basic goal. If you make the first move, then that would be even better. Since ancient times, other than great waves of ocean waves itself, there has never been a sword sect that could end a sect challenge in a mere 30 hours. If you really do that, Yaoguang, you will be courting death. Once the original members of Everlasting Autumn Water survive these 30 hours, and the main force from Great Waves of Ocean Waves joins Everlasting Autumn Water, then you will be completely finished. Everything that your sect has accumulated for over 10 years will all be in the hands of Everlasting Autumn Water. Oh, that's right. If I were OU Genu and OU Genu of Great Waves of Ocean Waves, then I would arrange for a few of my top experts to withdraw from Great Waves of Ocean Waves Sword Sect and join Everlasting Autumn Water. That would at least increase Everlasting Autumn Water's battle prowess by half. That way, it would be even more impossible for you to defeat Everlasting Autumn Water. This is actually a rather simple trap. They are using the 72-hour time limit to force you, Yaoguang, to make a risky decision. Once you step in, Great Waves of Ocean Waves will have tens of thousands of ways to crush you to death in front of Everlasting Autumn Water. So, if I were you, I would definitely not have any designs on Everlasting Autumn Water. That is simply courting death. Guhan's words were like a bucket of ice water that was poured over Yaoguang's head, causing Yaoguang to be completely dumbfounded. The latter part of what Guhan had said was something that Yaoguang had never thought of. He had thought that this was merely Great Waves of Ocean Waves operation to support Everlasting Autumn Water. He had never expected that there would be such a huge trap hidden within. Once he jumped into it, he would most likely be consigned to eternal damnation. But, Yaoguang's expression was filled with conflict and hatred. Finally, Yaoguang closed his eyes and his expression returned to a calm state. There are no buts. I have to take down Everlasting Autumn Water. If I can't, I would rather the entire Yaoguang sword sect be reduced to dust and cease to exist. Yaoguang revealed a rarely seen vicious expression. Since sect leader Yaoguang has already made up his mind, I won't try to persuade you anymore. Goodbye. As a military governor, I do not wish to get involved in this mess. Guhan stood up and was about to leave. Help me. You must have a way to help me, right? Yaoguang appeared in a flash and blocked Guhan's way. Whatever request you have, I will agree to it. As long as you are willing to help me this once. Any conditions? Guhan raised his brows and sent a text to Yaoguang through his communicator. After reading the text, Yaoguang did not even frown as he replied, "Sure, I agree to your request. You really aren't a good person, Yaoguang. I've thought so from the start." Guhan did not expect Yaoguang to agree so readily. He glared at Yaoguang and said, "All right, hand over the command of the challenge the day after tomorrow to me. I have 60% confidence to help you win this challenge." "Sure. Including me, Yaoguang, everyone in Yaoguang's sword sect will listen to your command, military governor. From now on, you, military governor, will be the deputy sect leader of my Yaoguang sword sect. Hee, it's a good thing that I forgot to leave Yaoguang sword sect after completing the mission. Otherwise, I would have to wait for 72 hours too." Guhan shook his head and turned to leave the meeting room. "That's right. The only person who could grasp your personality and set up such a trap for you is probably that guy. This time, I'm going to turn from a teammate to an opponent. This is really interesting. I'm looking forward to it." Chapter 297. After leaving the Yaoguang sword sect, Guhan decided to spend the next day sorting out the matters regarding the Yaoguang sword sect's challenge. Now, the most important task was to bring Yi Tian, the curious baby, into the dungeon. Guhan estimated the time and estimated that he could play for another 1 or 2 hours, which was just about the time needed to complete a small dungeon. Guhan arrived at the Yaoguang sword sect's dungeon transfer hub. This was a building unique to the sword sect. It could easily transfer the sword sect's players to the various dungeons. Players did not need to waste a lot of time going to the dungeon gates to enter the dungeon. This was a very good benefit for the sword sect's players. Clicking on the transfer page of the dungeon transfer hub, one would be able to see the dungeon tree page of Sword Maiden Online. Sword Maiden Online's dungeon system was like a huge tree that reached the heavens. There were countless branches extending from the trunk, and on top of each branch, there would be countless branches. These dungeons were all dungeons connected to one another. If one wanted to complete the later dungeons with richer rewards, they would need to complete the previous dungeons one by one. So far, Guhan's dungeon tree only showed that Guhan had completed 2 dungeons. One was the initial dungeon, and the other was the Wudang Peak dungeon. Some readers would ask, didn't he also complete the King Arthur's Betrayal dungeon? It was true that Guhan had indeed completed the King Arthur's Betrayal dungeon. However, when Guhan first cleared the King Arthur's Betrayal dungeon, the dungeon was in a hidden state. In other words, it did not require any prerequisites. That was why Guhan was able to join the dungeon. However, now that King Arthur's Betrayal had been added to the dungeon tree, it had become the top dungeon among the famed sword-level dungeons. If one wanted to challenge this dungeon, one would need to clear all 8 dungeons before this dungeon. Although Guhan was the first party leader to complete the King Arthur's Betrayal dungeon, it was useless. At that moment, the dungeon was still in an inactive state. Ignoring the famed sword-level instance dungeon, which was still very far away from Guhan, Guhan's target was the few instance dungeons that he could clear. The instance dungeon tree was made up of 6 instance dungeons. They were the Ancient Sword Main Storyline Dungeon, King Yu Jian Jian, the Treasure Sword Main Storyline Dungeon, Wudang Peak, the famed Sword Main Storyline Dungeon, Yangjing Defense Battle, the Spirit Sword Main Storyline Dungeon, Alps Battle, the Fairy Sword Main Storyline Dungeon, Return to England, and the Emperor Sword Main Storyline Dungeon, Riding into the Heavenly Court. In addition to these 6 main dungeons, there were a series of side dungeons that extended from the main dungeon. Each main dungeon was connected to 2 side dungeons, so Guhan had a total of 5 dungeons to choose from. However, Guhan did not intend to challenge the famed sword-level main storyline dungeon, Defense of Old Yangjing, because this dungeon required a lot of time. It would take at least 3 days to complete, and Guhan did not have that much time. These 4 instance dungeons and the side dungeons that were directly connected to the other main dungeons were known as first-round side dungeons. The side dungeons that were connected to first-round side dungeons were known as second-round side dungeons, and so on until there were n side dungeons. Guhan looked through the dungeons' information one by one. In the past 12 years, Guhan had spent most of his time researching the King of Yu's Gojian Sword dungeon. The rest of his time was spent researching the other main dungeons. Although Guhan understood these scattered side dungeons, he didn't know much about them. He was only slightly better than ordinary players who hadn't done their homework. Originally, Guhan's attention had been focused on the 2 treasured sword grade dungeons. After all, the base rewards of a treasured sword grade dungeon were double that of an ancient sword grade dungeon. However, when Guhan accidentally glanced at one of the ancient sword grade dungeons, he was shocked. Hey, is this a side dungeon? Guhan found an interesting instance dungeon in the ancient sword grade dungeon. The rewards of this instance dungeon weren't much, but to the Heavenly Reliance, it was a very interesting instance dungeon. Originally, Guhan had thought that this instance dungeon would be in the 4th or 5th round. He hadn't expected it to be a side dungeon. There's nothing to hesitate about. This is it. Guhan made up his mind. He tapped on the instance dungeon, and an instance dungeon door opened. Guhan brought the Heavenly Reliance and the King of Yu and instantly disappeared into the instance dungeon door. System announcement. Player Military Governor, welcome to the Hero's Rise from Insignificance Instance Dungeon. Quest objective. Protect the youth Yi Qing and allow him to successfully reach the next Survivor Sanctuary. Please note that the more Yuan Ku Yi Qing kills personally, the higher the instance dungeon's rating will be. System announcement. Quest 1 has been updated. Skinny Youth. Find the youth Yi Qing, gain his trust, and become his friend. Is this the scenery of this world 700 years ago? When Guhan entered the instance dungeon, he saw endless yellow sand. Countless ruins were buried by this yellow sand. If Guhan hadn't known that this was the Jiangnan River town, Guhan would have thought that he had arrived at the edge of the Sahara Desert. Yes, this place filled with yellow sand used to be the Jiangnan River town where birds sang and flowers bloomed. It was located near the former suburbs of Suzhou. Unfortunately, this water town had become a desert. When the wind blew, the yellow sand would fill the sky. It was said that this was one of the most intense battlefields after the apocalypse. A few Egyptian deities wanted to transform this area into a desert like their hometown. In the end, halfway through the transformation, they were killed by Gendi, who was passing by. Unfortunately, after the transformation of Sujo, even Gendi did not have the ability to restore this place to its original state. It was only after Yuzhong City was established that technology was used to slowly transform this desert back to its original state. However, before Yuzhong City was established, this area had always been a desert. However, this was the benefit of the desert. Even Yuan Ku could not stand such terrible living conditions. Other than the freaks of the Egyptian deities, there were probably not many Yuan Ku who would like to live in the desert. Therefore, this place had become a paradise for human survivors. Because it was too far away from the new Yangjing city, the survivors here did not have the mood or the ability to travel all the way to the new Yangjing city in search of some paradise. Instead, they chose to live in this place that even Yuan Ku did not want to stay in, struggling at death's door. According to the quest description, Guhan's first task was to find the young NPC Yi Qing. At this time, he should be living in a tribe nearby. Finding this tribe was not difficult. After all, this was only an ancient sword mode instance dungeon. It was an instance dungeon for players who had just completed the initial instance dungeon to further improve their abilities. Therefore, this kind of instance dungeon was relatively simple. The system did not set up so many traps like in King Arthur's Betrayal. As long as players obediently followed the instance dungeon's instructions, this instance dungeon would be very easy to complete. Finding Yi Qing's tribe was not difficult. This was because there were a series of footprints near where Guhan had appeared. In a place like the desert, all kinds of footprints would disappear without a trace with a slight breeze. The footprints that Guhan saw were very clear, which meant that the owner of the footprints had not been here for long. As expected, following the footprints, Guhan saw a group of humans walking forward with their heads lowered. Their bodies were almost completely naked, with only a few rags wrapped around the important parts of their lower bodies. According to common sense, people living in the desert had to wrap their bodies tightly. Even if the temperature outside was 40 degrees Celsius, they still had to do so. This sounded a little unbelievable. Shouldn't people not wear clothes when it was hot? Why did they have to wrap themselves up? Wasn't this contradictory? The person who asked this question must have not been exposed to the sun for a long time. Human skin could not be exposed to the sun for long periods of time. Once exposed to the sun for too long, the skin would dry out and shrink, increase wrinkles, decrease elasticity, dilate capillaries, pigmentation, white atrophic spots, rhomboid skin, actinic granulomas, and star-like spontaneous scars. Otherwise, why would people who basked in the sun on the beach have to rub sunscreen on their bodies? In a place like the desert where the sun was hot every day, if they didn't cover their skin, they basically wouldn't live past the age of 10. Their tender skin would dry up and crack, and finally their whole body would fester and die. However, the desert that Guhan was in was different. This was not a normal desert, but a desert that was formed by magic. In a place like Sujo where it was constantly raining, how could it be exposed to the sun for a long period of time? Therefore, these survivors didn't have to worry about the problem of their skin. Fortunately, the gods of the Egyptian pantheon only completed half of the magic transformation. They only changed the land into a desert, but they didn't have time to change the surrounding climate. Once the transformation was completed, this place would not be suitable for humans to live in. Because these humans couldn't find cloth at all, the surrounding areas that weren't part of the desert were all Yuan Li, and the few oases in the desert were also used to grow food. There was no place for people to grow flax. Hello. Guhan quickly caught up to the group of walking survivors. These survivors looked at Guhan and Yi Tian with envy and suspicion. They were envious because Guhan was wearing a full set of clothes, shoes, and hat. This was what they had dreamed of in their lives. What they were puzzled about was why Guhan and Yi Tian would appear here. This group of survivors had about a dozen people. Among them, there were a few brave, young, and strong fellows who couldn't help but lick their tongues. The clothes of these two humans that appeared out of nowhere were too beautiful. If they could take them off and wear them, how good would that be? And that woman, she was really too beautiful. Compared to her, the other women in the tribe seemed to have been dried out. They were practically no different from dried beans. Little bastards, lower your heads. Lower your heads. The middle-aged man who was leading the group fiercely scolded the few youths who had bad intentions. He was a knowledgeable person, and knew that there were still sword-bearers in this world. When he was young, he was fortunate enough to talk to a sword-bearer. At first glance, he felt that Guhan was like a sword-bearer. Because other than sword-bearers, no one could live so comfortably. Moreover, he even had a beautiful woman following behind him. This was the treatment that only sword-bearers could enjoy. Chapter 298. The team that Guhan met belonged to a small survival team called the Zongza tribe. According to the team leader, the ancestor of the Zongza tribe was a Zongza dealer. Before the apocalypse, it just happened to be a few days before the Dragon Boat Festival. This dealer had hoarded hundreds of tons of frozen Zongza in his warehouse, intending to make a fortune. After the apocalypse, this dealer, who liked to read web novels, decisively used the welding equipment in his warehouse to weld the entire warehouse shut, leaving only a small, concealed entrance. After a few days, this dealer seemed to have wandered around the area, and found 4 or 5 starving girls between the ages of 10 and 14. He then brought these 13-14-year-old girls into the warehouse, and lived a happy harem life with them. From a certain point of view, this Zongza dealer was a character with a harem template. Until he died of cancer 5 years later, his warehouse had never been visited by Yuan Ku. Even after he died, he still hadn't finished eating his Zongza. He spent a few months digging a cellar under the ground of his warehouse, and then moved all the ice and Zongza from the freezer into the cellar. This way, his Zongza could be kept frozen for a few years. This dealer died, but his harem survived, and even gave birth to a few children for him. This was the embryonic form of the Zongza tribe. After a series of events, the Zongza tribe finally developed into a small tribe with hundreds of people and blood relations. In the entire Suzhou desert, it could be considered a tribe with a small reputation. The team that Guhan met was the team in charge of collecting water from the Zongza tribe. The Zongza tribe had recently lost a battle with another tribe, and the oasis that they relied on for survival had also been taken away by that tribe. The most important thing in the desert was water. Without the help of the oasis, the Zongza tribe had to send out a team of adventurers, and take great risks to obtain water from other areas in Suzhou that hadn't been desertified. Guhan's quest target, Yi Qing, was in this Zongza tribe. However, he wasn't in this team of adventurers, so Guhan could only follow this team to the temporary stronghold of the Zongza tribe. On the way to the base, the leader of the adventurer team, the middle-aged man known as Brother Long, had been trying his best to please Guhan and Yi Tian. He even wanted to give Guhan a very precious alpine candy wrapped in a golden package. In this era, any candy was incomparably delicious, even if it had been around for more than 200 years. Of course, Guhan wasn't interested in a candy like that. Brother Long was a little embarrassed that he didn't give the candy away. However, he kept trying to talk to Guhan and tell him about the tragedy of his tribe. This also made Guhan understand why Brother Long was trying his best to please Guhan. It was because Brother Long hoped that Guhan could help the Zongza tribe reclaim their oasis. Without the oasis, not only did it mean that they would lose their water source, it also meant that they would lose their source of food. This meant that the Zongza tribe, who had been relying on their food reserves to survive, would soon run out of food and ammunition. However, apart from this Brother Long who was trying to curry favor with Guhan and the others after discovering their identity as sword-bearers, the rest of the youths were glaring at Guhan with anger. They didn't have a single shred of respect for Guhan. On the contrary, their eyes were filled with rage, as though Guhan was their father's murderer. However, this was the first time that Guhan had met them, and there wasn't any past grudges between them. It seemed like the hatred in their eyes had something to do with Guhan's identity as a sword-bearer. For these survivors to actually hate a sword-bearer who could protect their lives, this was an extremely interesting matter. After following the adventurer team for 10 minutes, Guhan finally arrived at a few buildings that were completely covered in sand. These buildings should have been built by the residents of the nearby villages before the Great Calamity. Because these buildings were built by the residents themselves, they were relatively sturdy. Even after being exposed to the elements for over 200 years and being buried by the desert, they still stood firm on the ground. These few buildings became the temporary stronghold of the Zongza tribe, and could barely provide shelter for the Zongza tribe in the desert. Outside these buildings, there was a simple wall made of sand. At the few exits of the wall, there were a few middle-aged men wielding guns standing guard. These guns weren't used to deal with Yuan Ku, because ordinary guns were completely useless against Yuan Ku. These guns were used to deal with humans. The human survivors in the desert weren't friendly towards each other, and fighting for survival resources was a common occurrence. In the desert, humans were the most dangerous creatures. Just like the tribe that had previously robbed the Zongza tribe of their oasis. It was probably because of the deterrence of these guns that the other tribe didn't dare to completely annihilate the Zongza tribe. Otherwise, robbing the Zongza tribe of all their food would be in line with their fundamental interests. After entering the Zongza tribe's temporary encampment, he discovered that most of the people were lazily lying on the ground, without any desire to move. Their faces didn't have the slightest bit of liveliness that a living person should have, as if they were waiting for death. "Hey, Guhan, why are they all like this?" Seeing this scene, Yi Tian asked in confusion. "They've probably lost all hope of surviving. In this desert, an oasis is a necessary territory for every tribe to survive. Once they lose their oasis, they'll lose their arable land, and without land, they won't have any food. This kind of tribe will either be swallowed up by other tribes, or wait for death." Guhan explained. Actually, Guhan didn't know much about this dungeon, unlike the King Arthur's betrayal dungeon where he had collected a few days' worth of information beforehand. Guhan had only read a few posts about this dungeon, and had a general understanding of the main storyline of the dungeon. The words that he had said to Yi Tian just now were mostly what Guhan had analyzed based on the information he had obtained from Brother Long's conversation. After the adventurer team entered the outpost, they split up. Brother Long arranged for Guhan to wait in the ruins of a dilapidated building for a while, before bringing Guhan to the second floor of a building. There was a white-haired old man waiting. In the entire tribe, this old man had the most clothes on him, and there were all sorts of strange items from before the apocalypse hanging on his clothes. From this, it could be determined that this old man was the Zongza tribe's elder or chief. "This little old man is Yi Yun. I wonder how I should address the two esteemed lords." The old man called Yi Yun spoke with a trembling voice, as if he was cowering. Furthermore, after saying those words, he planned on kneeling down to greet Guhan. This was not the bearing that a chief of a tribe should have. It was unknown if he was scared out of his wits, or if he was pretending to be pitiful. "Old chief, there's no need to be so courteous. My name is Military Governor, and I'm a sword wielder. She is my sword maiden, Yi Tian." The moment Guhan released his sword Yi Yun, who was about to kneel down, realized that his knees seemed to be held up by a powerful force, preventing him from kneeling down. My apologies. Old man Yi Yun no longer attempted to kneel down. Instead, he turned around and pushed aside a pile of sand behind him. He took out a large plastic bucket from within, and laboriously brought it in front of Guhan. Yi Yun opened the plastic bucket, and inside it was a bucket of flour. It was not even half the bucket's capacity. Yi Yun looked pitiful as he said with a face full of worry, "Lord, our tribe has nothing else to show our filial respect to you. This is our last bit of rations, please accept it." "This is your last bit of rations? With so many of you, this amount of flour probably won't even last 2 days." Yi Tian could not help but say after seeing such a small amount of flour. More than that. If we eat sparingly, we can eat for a week." Yi Yun smiled dryly. To feed 100 people for a week with such a small amount of flour, each person probably wouldn't even have enough for 5 pitiful bottle caps. "Then, since you only have such a small amount of flour, why do you still want to give it to us?" Yi Tian asked curiously. "Hey, this old man's tribe is doomed. Instead of wasting such precious rations on this old man's tribe, why don't we hand it over to the few sword wielders? Why don't we hand it over to the sword bearers? Once the sword bearers have their fill, they will have the strength to kill a few more Yuanyin. That way, My Zongza tribe can die without regrets. When Yi Yun said that, his expression was one of self-sacrifice and righteousness. At this moment, Yi Tian was moved. She closed the bucket and returned it to Yi Yun's hands. Then, she took out a large pile of bread, beer, beef jerky, rice pancakes, puffed foods, and various other food from her scabbard. Yi Tian had probably taken out all the food from her scabbard, forming a small mountain. It was probably enough to feed the Zongza tribe for a few weeks. Gu Han was also extremely surprised at this. He knew that Yi Tian's scabbard contained a lot of food, but he never expected that the scabbard contained so much food. This was actually the collection of the previous Yi Tian's consciousness fragment. If not, Yi Tian would not have had the time to gather so much food. Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you, Your Excellency. When the old man saw so much food, he immediately knelt down in front of Yi Tian. He hugged Yi Tian's calf and cried out his thanks. This made Yi Tian feel a deep sense of pride. When Gu Han and Yi Tian came out of Yi Yun's room, Yi Tian was still feeling good, thinking that she had done a great deed. However, when Yi Tian occasionally glanced at Gu Han, she realized that Gu Han's face was filled with a mocking smile. Hey, ugly freak, are you mocking me? Yi Tian's senses were extremely sensitive, so she immediately questioned Gu Han. No. Gu Han shook his head very straightforwardly. I don't dare mock you. Me. Yi Tian was not stupid. She raised her eyebrows and was about to flare up at Gu Han. But at this moment, a little kid suddenly flashed past Yi Tian and Gu Han. Before he left, he even said a very disdainful sentence, idiot sword lady. As such, Yi Tian stayed in her original spot, motionless. What's the matter? You are even angry at a child? Gu Han asked curiously. No, I just feel like I met someone familiar. Yi Tian's words were somewhat baffling. Chapter 299. Did you see someone you know? Gu Han wasn't surprised, as if he had already guessed Yi Tian's expression. I'm not sure. Yi Tian shook her head. Then let's go look for him. Maybe he really is someone you know. Gu Han's smile hid something interesting. No. Yi Tian, who had always been carefree and unrestrained, was actually afraid. She took a step back, indicating that she didn't want to look for this person. Don't you want to complete the dungeon quest? Let's go and complete the quest. All right, as you wish. We'll go and complete the quest now. Hearing Gu Han's words, Yi Tian let out a deep sigh of relief. When Gu Han brought her around the temporary hideout for a while, they finally arrived at a low hut. Yi Tian was a little angry. She found out that she had been deceived by Gu Han. She angrily pointed at a skinny boy in the hut and questioned Gu Han. Didn't we say that we're going to complete the quest and not look for someone we know? That's right, we're going to complete the quest. Gu Han shrugged his shoulders. This is our quest objective. You too. Is it fun to stop in front of someone else's house and point fingers? An angry little face emerged from the small hut. It was a little guy whose entire body was pitch black. His face and body were pitch black, as if he had just crawled out of a pile of briquettes. However, unlike those of his race who didn't mind exposing their private parts, this little guy was actually wearing a tight set of clothes. Well, maybe it couldn't even be considered a set of clothes. At most, it was just countless pieces of cloth wrapped together. Little guy, we want to ask you about something. I don't know if you can help us. Ji Yuhan gave this young man a brilliant smile. This kind of smile was rarely seen. At the very least, those who were familiar with Ji Yuhan had never seen this kind of smile before. I don't know anything. Don't ask me. The boy turned around and planned to ignore these two strange guys. However, Gu Han took out a bag of bread from his dimensional pocket and tore open the packaging. An alluring fragrance wafted out of the bag and floated into the boy's nose. The boy's head that had already turned around couldn't help but turn back. Are you planning to use this bread to exchange for my information? The boy took the initiative to ask before Gu Han could speak. You're very smart. Ji Yuhan nodded. This child could do it. It saved him the trouble of explaining. Okay, I'll tell you. The boy directly snatched the bread from Gu Han's hand and stuffed it into his mouth. After swallowing and wiping his mouth clean, He added, if you want to ask me if I don't know, then don't blame me. My goodness, who knows if you really don't know the information? If you don't want to answer, then it'll be over. Ji Han would have wasted a piece of bread. No, I think you definitely know what I want to ask. Guhan didn't care about the boy's petty tricks. Let me ask you, there's a boy called Yi Qing in this tribe. Where is he? Yi Qing. Hearing this name, Yi Tian, who was behind Guhan, trembled. Obviously, this name poked at a certain place in Yi Tian's heart. Yi Qing. You're looking for Yi Qing? The boy's face showed a trace of surprise. Why are you looking for a dead person? He died 5 or 6 years ago. He starved to death. Sigh, a child without parents is really pitiful. He starved to death, and no one was willing to bury him. Okay, I've answered your questions. You can leave now. I still want to take an afternoon nap. After answering Guhan's question, the boy planned to chase them away. However, even a fool could guess that the boy's answer was a lie. If Yi Qing was really dead, then this dungeon quest would be useless. Yi Qing, we haven't seen each other for so many years, but you're still like this. As expected, people don't change. Yi Tian, who was standing behind Guhan, suddenly began to laugh coldly. She looked at the boy in front of her coldly. I didn't think that I would have the chance to see you again. Yi Qing, it's been more than 700 years since we last met. More than 700 years. Yi Qing, who was full of nonsense, began to feel a little confused. He had only lived for more than 10 years. How could he have a friend that he hadn't seen for more than 700 years? Calm down, Yi Tian. This is a game. Guhan patted Yi Tian's shoulder and said to Yi Tian through the sword mark. This is a dungeon in a game. Everything you see is illusory data. This is not the real Yi Qing. It's just a bunch of data. Yi Tian didn't say anything. She also came to her senses. She silently lowered her head and directly entered the small house through the door. Yi Qing wanted to stop Yi Tian, but how could he, who was so skinny and weak, stop Yi Tian, who was a sword mother? So, he was directly pushed to the ground and fell. Hee. Guhan laughed. He helped Yi Qing up from the ground and entered the small house. Who are you people? What do you want? Don't you know that trespassing will result in death? Yi Qing was very angry. These two people were really too strange and didn't follow the rules. I'm sure you can guess who we are. As for the crime of trespassing, do you think there are police here? Fine, you're a sword wielder. You're awesome, you're amazing. You guys stay here. I'll leave. Yi Qing picked up some things on the ground and was about to leave these awesome sword wielder. You ate my food and gave me fake information. How are we going to settle this? Guhan pulled Yi Qing back with his sword chi. Yi Qing couldn't take another step forward. Even though his face was red, he still couldn't move. Fine, you guys are amazing. I admit it. Yi Qing wasn't someone who didn't know how to be flexible. Seeing that he couldn't escape from Guhan's clutches, he just sat on the ground and looked like he had been played to death. That's right. I'm Yi Qing. Tell me, why are you looking for me? Yi Qing stared at Guhan and Yi Tian provocatively. But I'm very hungry right now. I'm going to starve to death soon. You guys better give me something to eat. Otherwise, I won't answer a single word. Sure, it's a fair deal. Guhan threw another piece of bread to Yi Qing. Yi Qing hurriedly tore off the wrapping paper and took a big bite. You guys should be from Yangjing City, right? But we're indeed from Yangjing City. How did you know? Guhan asked with a smile. Isn't that simple? Who would be so extravagant as to wrap their bread in a transparent plastic bag? Only people from Yangjing City would have the time to do that. Speaking up to here, Yi Qing's face revealed a trace of yearning. Actually, even if you guys don't say it, I can guess why you guys are looking for me. Were you guys sent by him to pick me up? Him? Guhan shook his head. I don't know what you mean. Guhan really didn't know what Yi Qing was talking about. As mentioned before, Guhan only knew some of the main storyline of this dungeon. As for the specific plot and the various story backgrounds and details, Guhan didn't know. Stop pretending. You guys were sent by him. Yi Qing sneered. Otherwise, who in the entire Yangjing city would care about the life and death of a beast like me? It must have been hard on him. It's been more than 10 years, yet he still remembers me. Gu Han didn't say anything because he didn't know what Yi Qing was talking about. However, Yi Qing, who had opened his mouth, began to talk non-stop. It was probably because he thought that Gu Han knew what he was talking about. That person thinks that if he remembers me now and picks me up, I'll be grateful to him and call him my dear daddy. From the moment he left me and my mother here, I've cut off all ties with him. From now on, I, Yi Qing, am Yi Qing, a pawn of the Zongzi tribe. I'm not the descendant of Yi Da, the great sword-bearer. I've already sworn to the heavens that from now on, Yi Da and I will be separated by blood. Go back and tell him that unless he wants to see my dead body, don't disturb my life. Yi Qing had mistaken Gu Han for his father's subordinate who was here to pick him up. Listening to the things inside, Yi Qing's father was also a sword-bearer. This was a little interesting. Why would a sword-bearer from Yangjing City have a biological son in the Suzhou Desert thousands of miles away? Whether you believe it or not, we're not sent by your father to pick you up. Gu Han shook his head. Due to some special reasons, we have to find you and protect you until the upcoming danger is over. Ha! Yi Qing, who had tears in his eyes, raised his head and looked at Gu Han hesitantly. You guys really aren't sent by Yi Da to pick me up? Of course not. Unless the Yi Da you're talking about is a sword-bearer at spirit sword level or above, he wouldn't be able to command a sword-bearer like me. Furthermore, we don't plan to bring you back. If we really wanted to do that, we could just knock you out. There's no need to waste so much effort talking to you. You're a smart kid, you should know that I'm not lying. Then why are you looking for me? Yi Qing couldn't understand. Also, you said you're going to protect me and protect me through some danger. What the hell is this? How do you know what danger I'm going to face? And why do you want to protect a trash like me? Let me correct you. You're not trash. Your future is beyond your imagination. Because of the future you, we have to protect the present you. Do you understand? Gu Han spoke in a roundabout way. A normal person wouldn't understand. I understand now. Yi Qing nodded his head forcefully. Do you have some sort of foresight skill? Do you know that the future me is stronger than you can imagine, so you want to protect the present me who is weaker than you can imagine? Oh, maybe you guys don't have any foresight skill, but humans who came here from the future. Nowadays, there are Yuan coups from the past everywhere, so it's not strange for a few sword-bearers from the future to appear. Hearing Yi Qing's self-analysis, Gu Han couldn't help but feel a little stunned. Is it strange? Yi Tian, who was silently watching everything, sneered. He's one of the most powerful Gendis, the founder of Yuzhang City, Zhetian Gendi. His wisdom has always surpassed you mortals. This Yi Qing was actually the young Zhetian Gendi, the first sword-bearer of Heavenly Sword. Chapter 300. Yes, this disheveled and rebellious young man named Yi Qing was the future founder of China's second headquarter city, Yuzhang City, where Gu Han grew up, Zhegendi Gendi. The instant's dungeon's name was Hero's Rise from Humble Beginnings. It referred to the fact that before the heaven-shrouding sword emperor became a sword wielder, he was just a youth in a desert tribe who didn't have enough to eat. Looking at the legend of Zhetian Gendi's life, he was a main character even more than Gu Han. In Yi Qing's era, Zhetian Gendi was the main character without a doubt. This also explained why Yi Qing looked familiar. After all, he was her first swordsman. Although a girl changed 18 times between childhood and womanhood, the outline of her face when she was young was still very clear. However, what made Gu Han curious was the relationship between Yi Qing and Zhetian Gendi. Gu Han noticed that Yi Qing's attitude towards Yi Qing was not good. It was as if there was some kind of grudge between the two. It seemed that the history books and various legends said that Yi Qing was Zhetian Gendi's best friend was not trustworthy. There must be some unspeakable story between the two. Although I feel that what I just said sounded like a fantasy, there is one thing I can be sure of. You don't have any bad intentions towards me. Let me reintroduce myself. My name is Yi Qing. Although I don't know how much longer I can stay with you, I hope to be friends with you. Young Yi Qing was worthy of being the future Jendi. Although he was facing a swordsman who was many times stronger than him, he was neither arrogant nor servile. He took the initiative to ask Guhan to be friends. With this kind of attitude, even if Yi Qing did not have Jendi's talent, he would definitely be a person who could not be underestimated in the future. Okay, Yi Qing, we are friends now. Ji Yuhan held Yi Qing's hand and shook it hard. System notification. Quest 1, Skinny Youth, completed. You have found Yi Qing and become friends with him. System notification. Main quest has been updated. Quest 2, Find the White Iron Sword. There is a lost ancient sword Maiden White Iron Sword hidden near this temporary base. Please help Yi Qing find the White Iron Sword. A new quest had been issued. It was to help Yi Qing find Bai Taijian. Who would have thought that the great Jendi of the first generation would have an ancient sword maiden, the White Iron Sword, one of the 3 beginner sword maidens? It was a piece of beginner equipment that could be given away with a single click. However, it was worth mentioning that Yi Qing's White Iron Sword was not a man-made White Iron Sword, but a natural sword maiden White Iron Sword. In the ancient sword record, it was ranked around 300. Compared to the thousands of rankings, this was already a pretty good ranking. Yi Qing, time to eat. At this time, a man who only covered his most important parts came to Yi Qing's door, but he was shocked to find that Yi Qing was sitting with Guhan and Yi Tian. Seeing Guhan and Yi Tian, this person was clearly a little dumbfounded. The news about Guhan and Yi Tian had already spread throughout the tribe. Everyone knew that a powerful sword wielder had entered their tribe. However, they never expected that this sword wielder would actually be together with the stubborn and dirty Yi Qing. Uncle Yi Tian, what are you spacing out for? Give me my food. Yi Qing urged when he saw Yi Tian standing at the door in a daze. Oh, here you go. Only then did Yi Tian hand over the 2 slightly charred scones from the basket to Yi Qing's hands. Seeing these 2 scones, Yi Qing said in shock, Uncle Yi Tian, did the chief confer a title? He actually gave me 2 scones. How can you say that? How can you say that the chief has gone crazy? Do you think that giving you 1 more scone is a bad thing? These past few days, we haven't even eaten our fill, Yi Tian said unhappily. No, Uncle Yi Tian, our Zongzi tribe is in the most difficult time right now. We should try our best to save food in order to be able to survive this period. How can we be so extravagant as to eat 2 scones? Uncle Yi Tian, I'll give you another one. You go and persuade the chief not to be so extravagant. Yi Qing said sincerely. You're crazy, if you don't want to eat then leave. Yi Tian snatched the scone from Yi Qing's hands and left angrily. Seeing this, Yi Qing knew that what he said earlier was for nothing. He could only sigh, turn around, sit down, and silently nibble on the scones in his hands. I couldn't tell that you're so considerate of the tribe. Guhan smiled. I lost my parents when I was 4. If it wasn't for the kindness of the tribe that brought me up, I would have died in this desert a long time ago. It was the tribe that saved my life, and I, Yi Qing, must repay the kindness. Therefore, even if he came to take me to Yangjing City to enjoy a comfortable life, I would never leave the tribe. I, Yi Qing, will live and die with the tribe. As long as I, Yi Qing, am here, the tribe will be here. Yi Qing bit half of the scone and carefully hid the other half in his clothes. He had just eaten 2 pieces of bread from Guhan, and this time he only ate half of the scone, so he didn't feel hungry. Drink some water. Guhan handed a bottle of water to Yi Qing. Yi Qing was stunned for a moment, and thanked him. He unscrewed the bottle cap and drank all the water in 1 gulp. Then, like the half of the scone, he carefully kept the empty bottle. The most important thing in the desert is the container for water. This bottle is much more valuable than the water, Yi Qing explained. Yi Qing, since we're friends now, can I ask what's going on between you and your father, that him? If he's really your father, and you're worried about the survival of the tribe, I can ask him to help you when I return to Yangjing City. No, absolutely don't go to him. Yi Qing's reaction was very strong. I don't want to meet that ungrateful, cruel and heartless person again, and I will never accept his help. What's going on, Yi Qing? If you're my friend, then as a friend, I hope I can help you. Forget it, it's not a big deal to tell you. Yi Qing sneered. My father, the man called Yi Da, was the same as me. He lost his parents when he was young, and was brought up by the tribe as an orphan. In the end, not only did the chief not look down on my father, but he also married his own daughter to him, and later he had me. In the end, when I was 1 year old, he found a sword from God knows where, and became the sword-bearer, becoming the most powerful person in the tribe. So the chief passed the position to my father, and let him lead the tribe forward. At first it was quite good, because there was only one sword-bearer in the desert, and he was the most invincible human in the whole desert. All the tribes were afraid of our Zongza tribe, and we once owned 3 oases, with a population of more than 400. We were the most powerful tribe in the desert. But later, 2 sword-bearers from Yangjing City came, and we warmly welcomed them. In the end, they talked to my father for less than 10 minutes, and he decided to abandon our tribe, and go to Yangjing City to live a life of luxury. My mother and I were very happy at first, and thought that we could go to Yangjing City with my father to live a happy life. But that night, the man left without saying goodbye with the sword-bearers from Yangjing City, and left my mother and me alone in this yellow desert. He didn't even give us an explanation. So my mother and I lost our father, and the tribe lost a powerful chief. The surrounding tribes that were afraid of us joined forces after hearing the news, and launched attacks against us again and again. Until now, our Zongza tribe has lost all of our oases, and more than 300 of our tribesmen died in more than 10 years of fighting. If we still can't find an oasis to live on, our Zongza tribe will completely disappear. In the end, the first month after my father left, my mother went crazy because she couldn't accept the truth. Then, she ran into the desert alone, and we couldn't find any trace of her anymore. So I became an orphan. Fortunately, the tribesmen didn't vent their anger on me because of my father's departure, and instead raised me. So since I was young, I made up my mind that in this life, I would never want to acknowledge that cruel man, and that I would forever be with the tribe, through life and death, and through trials and tribulations. At first, I thought you were sent by my father to bring me to Yangjing City, because my mother told me that after he gave birth to me, he hurt his thing, and that it would be impossible for him to have a second child. So I thought he wanted to continue his bloodline, and wanted to bring me back. I'm sorry, I've wronged you. At this point, Yi Qing's childhood story came to an end. This story couldn't be considered a soul-stirring, twists and turns, or thrilling story. It was just a very simple story of abandoning a wife. Such stories happened all the time, from ancient times to the present, there were endless examples. In ancient times, there was Chen Shimai, and now there was a certain great ancestor. They were all typical people who abandoned their wives for the sake of their careers when they were young. Guhan listened very seriously to the story. Guhan didn't know that Zhetian Jendi had such an experience when he was young. Yi Tian also listened very seriously. It seemed that when she was with Yi Qing in the past, she had never heard Yi Qing talk about his own past. I can guess the reason why that man didn't bring you and your mother, Guhan suddenly said. What reason? Yi Qing's voice was a little emotional. This was the biggest knot in his heart, and it was difficult for him to let go of it every time. It's very simple. We went through many difficulties and dangers on the way here from Yangjing City. Halfway through, there was a fellow sword-bearer who left us forever. Guhan's face showed a sad expression, completely unable to tell that this was something he made up. Even if it was a sword-bearer, going all the way back to Yangjing City from here was a matter of 9 out of 10 chances of survival. If your father brought you and your mother, I'm afraid that 9 out of 10 chances of survival would be 10 out of 10. I don't want to argue for your father, because I don't know him, but I just want to tell you this possibility. Your father might not want you and your mother to die on the way to Yangjing City, so he left without saying a word. He might not be as heartless as you think. If that's the case, then he could totally not have left, right? Wouldn't it have been better to stay here and protect the tribe that raised him? Why did he have to go to that damn Yangjing City? Yi Qing's emotions were about to explode. Because no sword-bearer can resist the temptation of Yangjing City. Guhan curled his lips. To be precise, it's because he can't resist the temptation of improving his own abilities. Only by going to Yangjing City can your father possibly improve his strength. From this point of view, your father really owes you. So that's how it is. Yi Qing sat back down on the ground. The question that had been buried in his heart for a long time was finally solved. After listening to Gu Han's explanation, Yi Qing felt that his hatred towards his father had lessened a little. Chapter 301. This is bad, everyone be on high alert. Yuan Ku is here. Yuan Ku is here. Everyone stay alert. Yuan Shen is coming. Just as Gu Han was thinking about how to get Yi Qing to go out of the city to search for the white sword with him, suddenly, a few figures were running in the foothold in a panic, constantly announcing the same thing. Uncle, what happened? Yi Qing took the lead and rushed out, grabbing the man who was running, and asked loudly. Yuan Ku. Yuan Ku is here. The man said while panting, when I went out to investigate the surroundings just now, I saw a steel monster chasing after two humans. The two humans tried to resist with their guns at first, but their bullets directly passed through the steel monster's body. That's Yuan Ku, only Yuan Ku can't be hit by bullets. After saying these words, the man hurriedly ran to the building where the chieftain was. He was probably going to report to the chieftain. Master Gu Han, can you save our tribe? Without a sword bearer, I'm afraid many people in our tribe will die. The young heaven covering Jendi Yi Qing looked at Gu Han with a pleading look, implying that he could save the Zongzi tribe. In his eyes, Gu Han was all his hope and longing. To be able to make one of the strongest Jendi in history look at him like this, Gu Han was a little excited. Of course, as a sword bearer, saving ordinary humans is our mission. Even if I'm not your friend, I'll still fight for the Zongzi tribe. Now, let's not talk nonsense, bring me to the gate. I want to see what kind of steel monster Yuan Ku is, Gu Han said resolutely. Yes. The young heaven covering Jendi immediately ran to the front to lead the way for Gu Han, and soon, he brought Gu Han to the sand wall where they first entered the foothold. At this time, almost all the men were on high alert, or rather, panicking as they looked at the desert in the distance. They didn't gather here to defend against Yuan Ku's attack, but to see if Yuan Ku would discover their foothold. Once this Yuan Ku appeared in their field of vision, everyone would immediately flee in all directions. This was the best way to deal with Yuan Zhen that the survivors in the desert had comprehended, that was to use the fastest speed to run for their lives, hide themselves, and do their best to evade Yuan Zhen's pursuit. Then, when Yuan Zhen couldn't stand the desert's climate and left by himself. This was the survival philosophy of the desert survivors. At this time, everyone was nervously looking into the distance. At this time, there was no sign of the steel monster in sight. After waiting for a few minutes, the chief Yi Yun also rushed over. The first thing he did when he arrived was not to ask about the situation of the battlefield, but to kneel in front of Ji Yu Han. He begged Ji Yu Han to save his tribe with tears streaming down his face. In this regard, Gu Han naturally replied to Yi Yun with the same words that he had used to answer Yi Qing, which made Yi Yun feel relieved. With a sword-bearer blocking Yuan Yang, even if the sword-bearer can't beat Yuan Yang, it can still give my tribe more time and hope to escape. Yi Yun pondered with a perverted thought. But after a long time, there was still no sign of Yuan Ku. Everyone seemed to heave a sigh of relief. They felt that Yuan Shen would probably not come here, and they were temporarily safe. But soon, something happened. A woman with a shriveled face came to report a terrible news. She found traces of the steel monster behind the foothold. Because there was a steep slope behind the foothold, it limited their vision. The people in the foothold could not find Yuan Ku at the bottom of the slope. When they first saw Yuan Ku, it was already too late. Yuan Ku had already finished climbing up the slope and was running towards the foothold that was less than 500 meters away. Follow me. Without waiting for Yi Yun to say anything, Gu Han grabbed the hands of the youth, Jendi and Yi Qing, and went straight to the back of the foothold. Gu Han quickly pulled Yi Qing and disappeared from everyone's sight. Tribal chief, let's escape. I think that the sword wielder is too thin and weak. There's no way he's a match for that steel monster. Chief, it's more important for us to escape. With the sword wielder dragging us, we can escape. The man who had previously met Yuan Zhen tried to persuade Yi Yun. Nonsense. All our food is here. If we escape now, without food, we will still die. Yi Yun sternly reprimanded him. Listen to my commands. I will go to the back to observe the situation. All of you go and pack up our food. If the situation doesn't look good, listen to my command to escape. Understood? Yes. Everyone responded in unison. Escaping was the right thing to do. With Guhan running at full speed, he arrived at the back of the foothold in no time. Looking over, there was indeed something made of steel rapidly advancing towards the foothold. But it was not a steel monster, but a tank from before the apocalypse. Guhan took out his personal terminal and pointed it at the distant Yuan Ku. Yuan Ku's information appeared. Yuan Ku's name, Japanese Type 89 medium tank, modified. Level, Tiger Current 2D World, Real-World Appearance Instance Dungeon, most instance dungeons health points, 1, 5-star. Attack, 2-star Agility, 0, 5-star Fey Power, none abilities, 157mm short-barreled tank cannon, 2.6. 5mm machine guns. Ultimate skill, triple shot introduction. The world's first tank appeared after the Battle of the Somme. The Japanese army was keenly aware of the great value of tanks and immediately imported the British Mk4 tank. After careful research on this type of tank, Japan released the indigenous Type 89 tank. The Type 89 tank was fast, agile, light and convenient, and good at passing through trenches. But its armor was a fatal flaw. On the battlefield against the Japanese, there was no need to mention anti-tank cannons. Even a cluster grenade could directly penetrate the Type 89 tank's armor as long as it was placed in the right position. Hence, the Type 89 tank was also known as the Little Bean by the Chinese. It meant that this tank had a thin skin like a bean, and was the easiest tank for infantry to deal with. In a direct battle with tanks, it would not be of much use. It is worth noting that tanks and other weapons will not become Yuan Ku. Either there is a Yuan Ku controlling the tank, or it is a tank girl. Please distinguish the type of Yuan Ku. So it was just a tiger-level Yuan Ku. Guhan looked at the information and completely disregarded this Yuan Ku. It was just a tiger-level Yuan Ku. When Guhan was still an ancient sword tier player, he had not taken this Yuan Ku seriously. Now that Guhan was a treasured sword tier Yuan Ku, it was normal. This was to be expected. After all, this was an ancient sword tier dungeon. If the first player to appear was already above tiger tier, then the average ancient sword tier player would have no chance at all. They would just have to surrender and quit the dungeon. Lord Guhan, can you deal with him? If not, please leave this place immediately. The Zongzi tribe is not worth a lord swordsman sacrificing his life. Yi Qing, who had been dragged over by Guhan, blushed. This Yuan Ku, whose entire body was made of metal, was especially terrifying in his eyes. He felt that Lord Guhan might not be a match for this Yuan Ku. In fact, this kind of metal guy was the easiest to deal with in Yuan Ku, because he had all the information on him. On the other hand, the lone human Yuan Ku was the most difficult to deal with. You would never know what skills or tricks he would use against you. But obviously, Yi Qing did not think so. This was especially so when the cannon of this little tank flashed brightly. The cannon shell exploded beside Yi Qing, directly collapsing the already dilapidated building nearby. Dust flew into the air. Yi Qing suddenly felt that this Yuan Ku was too powerful, too arrogant. Yi Qing did not expect that in the future, this little tank would be like a loosely sealed can. With a casual wave of sword chi, he would be able to destroy hundreds or even thousands of such tanks. It's fine. I've come all the way from Yangjing, and there are many more powerful Yuan Ku than this. Guhan patted Yi Qing's shoulder, then turned to Yi Tian, who was beside him, and said, Yi Tian, kill it. I refuse. Yi Tian looked at Guhan, then looked at Yi Qing. Guhan immediately understood Yi Tian's meaning. She probably did not want to show off in front of Yi Qing. It seemed that she and Zhe Tianjendi had a lot of things that outsiders did not know about. Otherwise, she would not be so afraid of a mere Zhe Tian NPC. Then let King Yu do it. Ji Yu Han didn't want to force Yi Tian. Right now, Ji Yuhan hadn't tamed Yi Tian yet. If he rashly forced Yi Tian to do something he didn't want to do, it would probably leave an indelible knot in Yi Tian's heart. Thus, under Yi Qing's dumbfounded gaze, Gu Han swiped the center of Heavenly Sword's chest, and Yi Tian transformed into a treasured sword. Then, Gu Han sheathed it back into the scabbard on his back. As for Gu Han, he pulled out another bronze sword. After a flash of light, a girl with a completely different appearance from Yi Tian appeared beside Gu Han. Despicable person, didn't you say that you would let Yi Tian experience the entire dungeon once? Why did you pull me out? I was planning to sleep in the scabbard for a while. King Yu stretched his waist, and his full chest shook perfectly. After he finished shaking, he realized that there was Yi Qing beside Gu Han, and he shyly wrapped his arms around his chest. Yi Tian is throwing a tantrum, so there's no helping it. I'll have to trouble you to kill that tank for me. Gu Han pointed at the Type 89 tank. Okay. King Yu was now very obedient. He did not waste any time and directly rushed towards the unlucky tank. Being targeted by a famed sword-grade sword mistress, this tiger-grade tank was really a tragedy. Chapter 302. Zhetian Zhendi Yi Qing watched as the slender King Yu slowly walked towards the terrifying steel beast that could shoot out lightning. He felt worried. He felt that the tattered bronze sword in King Yu's hand wasn't a match for this steel monster. Watch calmly. If King Yu can't deal with a mere tiger-level Yuan Ku, then she wouldn't be King Yu. Gu Han's tone was very relaxed. It was as if it was a piece of cake for King Yu to deal with the seemingly powerful Yuan Ku. This made Yi Qing relax quite a bit. But very quickly, Yi Qing realized that his worries were completely unnecessary. The entire battle was as relaxing as an entertainment activity. King Yu didn't walk quickly towards the tank. His posture was also very leisurely. He was like a beauty that came to a shopping street to buy goods. When he walked, he even had a graceful catwalk. He didn't put Yuan Ku in his eyes at all. King Yu's speed was so slow, which naturally gave the tank a lot of time to reload. A cannonball flew out of the tank's barrel and aimed at the advancing King Yu. However, this cannonball's accuracy was very bad. It exploded near King Yu, causing dust to fill the sky. If the first shot didn't hit, another shot would come. The quality of the crew in the tank was quite good. A mere tank was able to fire a shot every 5 seconds. Moreover, the accuracy of the shots was constantly improving. When the 4th shot was fired, the shot finally hit the walking King of Yu. Normally speaking, in a battle between tanks, completing the shooting calibration within 4 shots was a very amazing thing. Moreover, this tank's target wasn't a tank of the same size as him, but a human that was much smaller than a tank. If this accuracy was placed in World War II, he would definitely be an ace gunner. Not good. Her Excellency King Yu has been shot. We have to save her. He didn't expect Yi Qing to be quite brave and loyal. When he saw King Yu get shot, he wanted to rush over to save her. He completely disregarded the possibility of dying to Yuan Ku's cannon. It seemed like it wasn't purely luck that he could become Zhendi in the future. No need, continue watching. Gu Han pressed down on Yi Qing's shoulder. When the smoke dissipated, King Yu's figure appeared once again. Moreover, he seemed to be completely unscathed. There wasn't even a trace of being burnt. System notification: your sword Maiden King Yu has been attacked by an artillery shell. Personal shield energy, -128. A loss of 128 points of shield energy. On an ancient sword rank sword lady, that was about half the damage, but on King Yu, it was only 3%. Seeing that his cannonballs didn't seem to deal any damage to King Yu, the little bin tank became a bit anxious. Cannonballs continuously shot out from the cannon. They were extremely accurate, and around half of them hit the area around King Yu. But it was useless. They couldn't even break through King Yu's personal shield. If a normal, rational person was controlling this tank, they would choose to reverse and retreat, or simply turn around and run. However, Yuan Ku below the nether grade would basically lose most of his rationality after passing through the dimensional rift and become a beast that only knew how to attack. Therefore, this little bin tank chose to continue firing at King Yu and bombarding him. This determined their fate of death. When King Yu took another cannonball and his personal shield fell to about 80%, the battle was about to end. This was because King Yu had already walked to the side of the little bin tank. King Yu tapped his toes and jumped more than 5 meters high. He stood on the top of the little bin tank and raised his Gojen sword. He swung at the cannon barrel, and the short cannon barrel was easily cut off like a carrot. Realizing that its cannon barrel was gone, the little bin tank finally started to panic. Its diesel engine started to roar, and it trembled as it planned to escape. But how could King Yu let them escape? King Yu jumped down from the little bin tank and slashed at the belt, crippling the little bin tank's mobility. Then, like a butcher dismembering an ox, he slashed at the tank's armor and cut off all the steel plates. In fact, King Yu could have been more direct and cut the tank into two. However, King Yu seemed to be in a bad mood and deliberately played with the little bin tank. As a result, the tank's armor was tragically cut off, and the entire driver's compartment was exposed. Let's go up and take a look. Guhan grabbed Yi Qing's neck. Guhan was already very familiar with this action. He had practiced this skill when he had grabbed Qing Pin. Although Yi Qing's body was much larger than Qing Pin's, judging from the weight, he seemed to be lighter than Qing Pin. This was not strange. The poor Yi Qing was served with good food and drinks, and he ate meat every day. Naturally, he was a lot more hungry than Yi Qing, who was always hungry and even hungrier than Yi Qing. Yi Qing, who was grabbed by the neck by Guhan, felt like he was flying in the sky. In the blink of an eye, he arrived next to the little bin tank. At this moment, King Yu had just grabbed 4 humanoid Yuan Ku out of the tank. How come there are 4 women? When Yi Qing saw the humanoid Yuan Ku that King Yu had pulled out, he was shocked to discover that they were actually 4 girls. They didn't look like adult girls. The 4 female Yuan Ku were wearing tight sportswear. Guhan had seen some information before the apocalypse and knew that these sportswear were the sportswear worn by female students in school. In other words, in their world, these girls should be school students, and female high school students at that. At this moment, the 4 female high school students seemed to have fainted during the battle. They were lying straight on the ground, allowing their bodies to be exposed in front of Guhan and Yi Qing. The inside of the chariot was extremely hot. Therefore, the sportswear of these female high school students were soaked in sweat and stuck tightly to their bodies, exposing their soft and youthful curves. Perhaps youthful wasn't the right word to describe these 4 female high school students. 2 of the girls had voluptuous breasts and looked no different from mature women. Originally, it was the time for female high school students to grow their bodies properly. Moreover, the development of female high school students in the sports club was even better. Guhan, how do we deal with these 4 Yuan Ku? King Yu's eyes showed a bit of pity. It seemed like these 4 immature female high school students Yuan Ku had aroused King Yu's compassion. King Yu really couldn't kill 4 defenseless female high school students. Yi Qing, what do you think? Guhan didn't answer directly and asked Yi Qing instead. This. Yi Qing hesitated. He stared blankly at the 4 female high school students with a conflicted expression. This couldn't be blamed. Yi Qing was a young and hot-blooded lad after all. It wasn't strange for his imagination to run wild after seeing 4 female high school students. Jendi was also human. Plus, Yi Qing wasn't the decisive Jendi. Lord Guhan, they're all Yuan Ku, right? Yi Qing thought for a moment and asked Guhan. Yes, that's right. They're all Yuan Ku. At that moment, the 4 girls had already woken up and were struggling to get up. Their eyes and pupils weren't the black of a normal person, but a blood-red color. This proved that they had already lost their rationality during the process of crossing the dimensional rift and no longer possessed the spirit and willpower of a normal human. Actually, it's very easy to determine if they are Yuan Ku. You just have to touch their bodies. Guhan saw that Yi Qing was still hesitating and added, Yuan Ku's body is hidden in the dimensional rift, and only humans with sword essence can touch it. Otherwise, ordinary humans won't be able to touch their bodies. This is also why human weapons are ineffective against Yuan Ku. Touch these 4 and you'll know if they are Yuan Ku. All right. Yi Qing nodded and extended his hand, intending to touch the 4 female high school students' Yuan Ku bodies. When they saw someone extending their hand, the 4 young girls were very resistant. They bared their teeth and roared at Yi Qing like wild beasts, as though they wanted to swallow Yi Qing alive. It looked very terrifying. Even though Yi Qing was a little afraid, he still touched the arms of the 4 Yuan Kus without any hesitation. Yi Qing was stunned for a moment before touching their heads and pinching their full breasts. Lord Guhan, these 4 girls aren't Yuan Ku. Yi Qing can touch them. How can this be? Guhan seemed to be thinking on the surface, but he already knew why Yi Qing could touch the 4 Yuan Ku bodies. It was a crucial step in Guhan's plan. At this time, Guhan actually had another thought in his mind. I didn't expect Zhe Tianjendi to be so lustful at such a young age. He even groped Yuan Ku's breasts. Could it be? Guhan paused his gossip about Zhe Tianjendi and pretended to be enlightened. I understand now. That must be it. Yi Qing, congratulations. You can become a sword bearer. I can become a sword bearer. Yi Qing was stunned. He lowered his head and thought for a few seconds. I know. Yi Qing's eyes were bright and excited. Lord Guhan said before that only humans with sword essence can touch Yuan Ku's body. So I also have sword essence in my body. People with sword essence in their bodies can become sword bearers. As expected of Zhe Tian was able to quickly analyze the situation, saving Guhan the trouble of explaining it to him. That is right. Those with sword essence in their bodies can become sword bearers. Guhan nodded. The plan was proceeding quickly. It would not take long before this instant's dungeon was over. So, Lord Guhan, how can I become a sword bearer? Yi Qing asked curiously. It is very simple. We need to find your sword lady, Guhan replied with a smile. Chapter 303. Lord Guhan, how should I find my own sword maiden? Yi Qing asked Ji Han. At this moment, there was a flame of desire burning in Yi Qing's eyes. After knowing that he could become a sword wielder, the burning desire in Yi Qing's heart burned fiercely. Any sword can be your sword maiden. Of course, most of them can't be your sword maiden. Ji Han briefly explained the situation of the sword maiden to Yi Qing. I suggest you search the surroundings to see if there are any swords or the like. Hold her in your hand for 10 seconds, and you will know whether she is your sword maiden or not. Ji Han's words were actually quite nonsensical. Think about it, in modern society, many humans had experimented over and over again in places like the sword pavilion that were filled with sword ladies, but none of them could find a sword lady that could synchronize with them. How could an ordinary person find a few broken swords to experiment with in a desert like this? However, that sentence only applied to normal people. It didn't apply to a prodigy like the heaven-covering sword emperor. If it were up to him, he would probably be able to successfully synchronize 3 or 4 sword ladies. Moreover, the system's quest notification clearly told Ji Han that there was an ancient sword lady, the White Iron Sword, that could be synchronized with Yi Qing nearby. Alright, I remember that the chief once collected a few swords. I'll go and ask the chief for one. Although Yi Qing was quick-witted and shrewd, he was still a young man. He could not hide the excitement in his voice. Sure, but what about these Yuan Kus? Guhan pushed Yuan Ku's problem to Yi Qing. If they escape later, I'm afraid they'll hurt other humans. Guhan looked at Yi Qing with a smile. There was always something unfathomable in his eyes. Yi Qing understands. If I may be so bold, I'd like to borrow your sword maiden from Lord Guhan. Just now, when Ji Han was explaining the basic situation of the sword maiden to Yi Qing, he had told Yi Qing that only the sword maiden could attack the Yuanshan. Sure, no problem. Guhan's hand touched the hilt of the heaven-reliant sword. Then, the heaven-reliant sword immediately roared through Guhan's sword mark, surnamed Ji. If you dare hand over my original body to Yi Qing, don't even think about commanding me for the rest of your life. Good fella, Yi Tian doesn't even address this heroine as this heroine and calls herself Old Mother. Looks like she's really pissed off. King Yu, sorry to trouble you. Guhan was helpless and could only ask King Yu for help. Since Yi Tian refuses to yield, then this king naturally won't yield as well. Otherwise, Wouldn't this king be even lower than Yi Tian? King Yu also rejected Gu Han's request. Gu Han smiled bitterly and could only take out the Qingpin sword. Fortunately, Qingpin's main body didn't like to log into the game. Otherwise, if the three sword ladies didn't let anyone touch them, Gu Han would be embarrassed. Here. Gu Han handed the Qingpin sword to Yi Qing. When Yi Qing received the Qingpin sword, his body suddenly started to tremble, especially the tip of the Qingpin sword. It kept shaking, fully displaying the fear in Yi Qing's heart. Although he was afraid, Yi Qing's movements didn't slow down. His eyes were wide open as he stared at the four female experts lying on the ground. Then, he raised the sword and the Qingpin sword accurately pierced the hearts of the four female high school students. Is this okay, Lord Gu Han? The girls on the ground started to bleed profusely. The blood quickly dyed the ground red. At the same time, their bodies started to twitch like chickens and ducks that had their necks cut and their blood drained. Yi Qing resisted the urge to vomit and returned the Qingpin sword to Gu Han. First time killing Yuan Ku? Gu Han took the Qingpin sword and asked casually. Yes, first time. Yi Qing nodded. By then, the Yuan Ku girls had stopped twitching. Their skin was pale. At the same time, a vortex appeared in the middle of the space. That meant that the Yuan Ku girls had died. Not bad. You acted quickly, your movements were simple and precise. In the future, you will become an excellent swordsman. Perhaps, you will stand at the peak of all swordsmen. Gu Han patted Yi Qing's shoulder. This is your first time, but you will experience it many times in the future. As you kill more, you will get used to it. We are all people whose hands are stained with blood. However, you must remember, this blood must not include our own human blood. System prompt. Quest objective: Yi Qing has killed Yuan Ku. Number 4. Please keep up the good work. The more Yuan Ku Yi Qing kills, the higher the instance dungeon evaluation. Lord Gu Han. Lord Gu Han. Thank you for saving our Zongzi tribe. Our Zongzi tribe's gratitude towards Lord Gu Han is like a torrential river, or like the Yellow River flooding out of control. Seeing Gu Han, Chief Yi Yun knelt in front of Gu Han and flattered Gu Han loudly. This line was passed down by Yi Yun's grandfather's 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 grandfather. It was said that when facing an undefeatable opponent, one had to say this line decisively. It might even save one's life. The old man even hugged Gu Han's feet and wanted to kiss Gu Han's shoes, but was pushed away by the disgusted Gu Han. Mr. Chief, eliminating Yuan Ku is what we swordsmen should do. I can't accept it. If you continue like this, I will leave immediately. Yes, I was rash. Hearing Gu Han's words, Yi Yun hurriedly retreated, maintaining a certain distance from Gu Han. Ahem, Mr. Chief, I have a piece of good news for you. When I was fighting with Yuan Yang just now, I discovered that this little brother actually has the talent to become a sword-bearer. With a little guidance and some luck, he can become a true sword-bearer. Is that so? Yi Yun, who thought he would be overjoyed to hear that a native sword-bearer had appeared in his tribe, had a strange expression on his face. He wanted to say something, but words failed him. Vaguely, there was a hint of disapproval and hatred. Is that so? That's great. Yi Qing is Yi Da's child and has Yi Da's bloodline. Our tribe has long felt that he can become a swordsman. He will definitely become one. From this sentence, it was obvious that Yi Yun was not happy about Yi Qing becoming a swordsman. He was even a little unwilling. Grandpa Chief, don't worry. I, Yi Qing, am not that ungrateful Yi Da. I, Yi Qing, was raised by the tribe. Without the tribe's care, I, an orphan, would have long become a skeleton in the desert. If I, Yi Qing, become a swordsman, I will use my life to protect the tribe's safety. I will make our tribe the strongest tribe in the desert. I, Yi Qing, will never leave this tribe. Yi Qing could tell that Yi Yun was worried. He stepped forward and held Yi Yun's hand tightly. He said this in a firm and heartfelt manner. Good. Hearing Yi Qing's words, Yi Yun was moved to tears. Yi Qing, the tribe did not raise you for nothing. Grandpa Chief knows that you are different from your father. When I leave, I will leave the tribe to you. I believe that under your leadership, our tribe will be able to live well. Grandpa. Child. 2 pairs of hands, one white and tender, the other dry, held each other tightly. No one knew how much sincerity there was in this. HMPH, liar. In the end, you still left this place. You said that you would stay in the Zongza tribe forever. What a complete joke. Yi Tian, who was in the scabbard, sneered. It seemed that Yi Qing still left the Zongza tribe. He did not fulfill the promise he made in front of the chief. Grandpa, I remember that our tribe has a few treasured swords. Can you take them out for me to try? Who knows, my sword lady might be among them, Yi Qing said anxiously. He was eager to obtain his sword lady. Of course, no problem. Grandpa will bring you there to try. Yi Yun agreed readily. He led Yi Qing into the small building where he met with Gu Han. He took out a bag from a hidden place and opened it. There were a few rusty treasured swords inside. Ji Yu Han only needed to glance at the pocket to know that Yi Qing would not be able to find his sword lady in it. Because not only were the swords rusty, none of them looked like white iron swords. Since the system said that Yi Qing's ancient sword lady was a white iron sword, then Yi Qing must be a white iron sword. The messy swords in the bag could not be successful. Sure enough, Yi Qing held the swords in his hand for tens of seconds, but none of them had any reaction. Although he failed, Yi Qing did not seem depressed. He returned the swords to Yi Yun and asked, Grandpa Chief, I remember that our tribe should have more than 10 treasured swords. Why are there only 4 left? Ari, child, you don't know. A few days ago, we escaped from the oasis in a hurry. The remaining swords were left in the oasis. I'm afraid they are all in the hands of the Mastiff tribe. Grandpa can't do anything about it. Yi Yun sighed a few times. Suddenly, he had an idea. Coincidentally, Lord Guhan is here. Why don't you beg Lord Guhan to bring you to the Mastiff tribe? With Lord Guhan's help, the Mastiff tribe would definitely not dare to resist Lord Guhan's will. That's not a good idea. How can we trouble Lord Guhan for such a matter? Yi Qing shook his head desperately, indicating his refusal. It's fine. It's just a trip to the Mastiff tribe. Compared to having a new swordbearer, this little bit of trouble is nothing. Guhan obviously would not reject it. If not, he would not be able to complete his dungeon. Chapter 304. The oasis that the Bayan tribe robbed from the Zongza tribe was not too far from the Zongza tribe. It took them less than 10 minutes to reach it. Of course, Guhan also contributed to this. Guhan grabbed Yi Qing's neck and ran at a speed of 60 kilometers per hour. Under normal circumstances, it would take Yi Qing at least 1 or 2 hours to reach the oasis. Master Guhan, we're here. Be careful, don't be discovered by the Bayan tribe. After arriving at the outskirts of the Bayan tribe, Yi Qing hurriedly called for Guhan to stop. Some unwilling tribesmen wanted to secretly investigate this oasis to see if there was a chance to take it back. As a result, they were discovered by the Bayan tribe, who chased them all the way back to their temporary stronghold. 3 or 4 young men died, so Yi Qing instinctively told Guhan to stop and be careful. Be careful of what? Guhan threw Yi Qing onto the sand. We'll walk in openly. Do you think the Bayan tribe would dare to attack a swordbearer? They wouldn't dare. Yi Qing rubbed his head. Even if you beat them to death, they wouldn't dare to attack Master Swordbearer. Thus, Guhan led King Yu and Yi Qing towards the oasis in the desert. 2 scouts who were observing from the observation tower immediately discovered Guhan and Yi Qing. They immediately grabbed wooden sticks and hit a broken gong beside them. Very soon, a large group of people with disheveled clothes rushed out with all kinds of weapons in their hands. These people's weapons were different. Some of them were holding pitch-black guns, which were very intimidating. Most of them could only hold the sharpened wooden sticks in a very tragic manner. However, looking at their physical quality and condition, these people were indeed much stronger than the people of the Zongza tribe. Each of them was full of fighting spirit. No wonder they could drive the Zongza tribe out of this oasis. I was wondering who it was. So it's you, Yi Qing. You were lucky enough to escape with your lowly life. Why are you so eager to return it to me now? Among this group of aggressive people, a young man wearing a complete set of clothes stood out from the crowd. Although this set of clothes was full of pudding, the fact that he could wear a complete set of clothes showed that this young man had an extraordinary status in the Tawu tribe. His name is Nquan. He is the son of the Bayan tribe's chief. He is very brave. He was the first one to rush into the oasis that day, Yi Qing whispered to Guhan. He also specifically pointed out that this young man was the chief's son. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who he is. Go tell him my identity and ask them to let us in. Guhan said disdainfully. Yes, sir. With Guhan's support, Yi Qing was very confident. He swaggered to the opposite side of Nquan and loudly announced, Nquan, this is the swordbearer from Yangjing City. Now that the swordbearer has something to do in the oasis, get out of the way and don't block the swordbearer's way. Looking at Yi Qing's arrogance, Guhan couldn't help but sigh. He didn't expect the dignified Zhejiandi to be his follower. Unfortunately, this was only in the game. It didn't have any practical meaning. Swordbearer. Nquan was taken aback. Only then did he notice that there were two people beside Yi Qing, a man and a woman. They were wearing clothes and pants, as well as all kinds of strange props. They were much more advanced than what he was wearing. To think that he thought that the clothes he was wearing were the best in the desert. Compared to them, he was so ashamed that he didn't even know where he was. According to the usual plot, Nquan would immediately order all his subordinates to attack Guhan. Since this guy dared to wear better clothes than him, Nquan would definitely snatch this guy's clothes and put them on himself. Then, he would completely disregard the problem of Guhan's strength. In any case, he would just give Guhan a chance to act cool. If he didn't make a move, how could Guhan act cool? Unfortunately, this Nquan didn't play according to the plot. He was just a young man with intelligence. After observing the clothes, Nquan believed half of Yi Qing's words. Even if all the clothes of the tribes in the desert were gathered together, they wouldn't be able to come up with a set of clothes like this. These two people must have come from somewhere other than the desert. They had traveled through mountains and rivers, passing through countless territories of Yuan Ku to arrive here. If it was an ordinary person, they would have died countless times already. Only the swordbearer could do this. So it's the swordbearer. Nquan has been disrespectful. Step aside, let the swordbearer enter our tribe. Nquan immediately ordered all his subordinates to disperse, making a path for them. Nquan's thinking was very simple. If Guhan was really the swordbearer, then no matter what, he couldn't beat him. It was better to serve the sword-bearer well. If Guhan wasn't the sword-bearer and was just used by Yi Qing to scare people, then it didn't matter. Once they entered the Bayan tribe, would these two people still be able to escape? There are a lot of smart people in this dungeon. Guhan smiled indifferently and strode forward. Your Bayan tribe is lucky. Yi Qing muttered in his heart. He was looking forward to this idiot Nquan attacking Guhan and provoking Guhan. Then, he would drive the entire Bayan tribe out of the oasis. This way, their Zongza tribe would have an opportunity. Fine, as long as I can become the sword-bearer, it won't be too late to settle the score with the Bayan tribe, Yi Qing said in his heart. The Zongza tribe and the Bayan tribe had long been incompatible with each other like fire and water. Please. Nquan led Guhan into the oasis. It was in this oasis that Guhan saw the misty rain of Jiangnan. The sky full of sand dunes was not excessive. It was directly connected to a piece of moist land. In the blink of an eye, they had arrived at a land of fish and rice. Green trees and red flowers were everywhere. There was even a smell of straw in the air. Sir, please take a look. This piece of land is the most important thing to feed our more than 300 people of the Bayan tribe. It is the most important thing for us to survive. Nquan suddenly said, as if he was afraid that Guhan was the one who came to destroy the land. Mph, shameless bastard. This land was clearly cultivated by our Zongza tribe. When did it belong to your Bayan tribe? Yi Qing, who was behind Guhan, said loudly. Anyway, with Guhan here, he had nothing to be afraid of. More than 10 years ago, It was your Zongza tribe who snatched this oasis from our Bayan tribe. Now, we are just taking back what originally belonged to us. Is there anything wrong with that? Quan said righteously. It seemed like this oasis was also snatched from someone else by the Zongza tribe. Yi Qing, I'm only here to help you find your sword lady. I won't interfere in the matter between your tribe and Quan's tribe. Keep your petty thoughts to yourself. Gu Han said indifferently. Yi Qing's expression immediately turned gloomy, while Quan let out a sigh of relief. It seemed like he didn't have to worry about the sword-bearer attacking his tribe anymore. However, this also confirmed that this man was a genuine sword-bearer. The group of people silently walked in the oasis. This oasis was not big, and the fields were gone in a short while. Seeing this scene, King Yu curiously asked, "Strange, I see that there is normal land under the sand. Why don't you clear away the sand? Wouldn't that create more oases?" King Yu's words hit the nail on the head. After all, this was a water town in Jiangnan. It was not far from the sea. Although it had been transformed into a desert by Yuan Yang's magic, the effect of the magic was not unchangeable as long as the surviving humans worked hard. The fertile land covered by the sand could be reclaimed. It wouldn't take long for the desert to return to its original state. However, after hearing King Yu's question, both Quan and Yi Qing fell silent. They didn't say a word, as if they didn't want to answer King Yu's question at all. "Why aren't you talking? Answer King Yu's question." King Yu was a bit angry. Why wasn't anyone willing to answer such a simple question? The reason is very simple. It's not that these people don't want to restore this place to a land of fish and rice. It's because they can't restore this place to a land of fish and rice. Am I right, Yi Qing and Quan? Gu Han meaningfully looked at the two people who didn't speak. Sir is wise. Yi Qing and Quan praised. How could they not want to live a life of ample food and clothing? But what if the price was their lives? The reason why humans could survive in this desert was because Yuan Ku didn't like the desert's environment. They didn't want to enter the desert, so they naturally didn't want to kill the desert's survivors. This was the fundamental reason why these survivors could struggle in the desert for more than 200 years. Once the desert disappeared, this place would return to Jiangnan's water village. That would be the time for these survivors to die. Therefore, they would rather live a life of hunger than change the environment here. It was all for the sake of survival. Quan's father, the chief of the Bayan tribe, was already respectfully welcoming Gu Han's arrival in front of a brick house. Quan had already sent someone to report Gu Han's news to the chief. Compared to Quan, his father's eyes were more sinister. If Quan was only 60% sure that Gu Han was the sword-bearer, then Quan's father was 90% sure because he had dealt with the sword-bearer once. After a series of hypocritical pleasantries, Gu Han straightforwardly explained his intentions to the chief. The chief pondered for a moment. "Sir, it's not that I'm willing to listen to Sir's orders. It's just that Yi Qing's Zongza tribe and our Bayan tribe are mortal enemies. If I give these swords to him and he really becomes the sword-bearer, then there's no reason for Yi Qing not to retaliate. I hope Sir can understand." Chapter 305. Your reason is very good. I understand it very well. When Jiyu Han heard the words of the Bayan tribe's tribal chief, he didn't get angry, he just faintly replied, "But I also have my reasons. I hope that you can consider it from the perspective of humanity. Humanity is now in a crisis of life and death. If we want to drive these Yuan Kus out of our world, we need a large number of sword-bearers. The more the better." The chairman of Yangjing City once said such a famous sentence. "Do you know?" Gu Han suddenly asked the chief of the Bayan tribe. The chief of the Bayan tribe was a bit confused. He had never been to Yangjing City, so how could he know what the chairman of Yangjing City had said? He didn't even know that the supreme leader of Yangjing City was called the chairman. Wasn't this the title of the leader of a reactionary force before the Great Calamity? Shouldn't the heroic leader of justice be called the chairman? How would I know what the big shots of Yangjing City have said? I'm just a lowly weed. I've never had the honor to hear the famous words of the chairman, the chief of the Bayan tribe said humbly. It doesn't matter if you don't know, I'll tell you. Ji Han's face was full of smiles. The chairman once taught us that the sword-bearers are great, they are the hope of mankind, they are all existences higher than ordinary humans. If humans want to survive, they must kneel in front of the sword-bearers and use everything they have to serve the great sword-bearers. As the old saying goes, the more soldiers Seongyu summons, the better. Now, I also have a saying. Sword-bearers, the more the better. In my opinion, it's a good deal to exchange the lives of 10 ordinary people for the birth of a sword-bearer. Mr. Chief, do you think the chairman is right? This sentence wasn't fabricated by Gu Han. It was something that a chairman had indeed said in history. That period of time happened to be the most difficult period of the first difficult sword era. Humans only had 3 base cities, 2 of which had been breached. Only one city, Yangjing, was left standing on Earth. At that time, the chairman of Yangjing City hated the fact that there were too few sword-bearers. He launched a crazy plan to create sword-bearers and had scientists frantically research ways to increase the number of sword-bearers. Most of the current black technology related to sword-bearers started at that time. For some reason, it evolved into a culture of worshipping sword-bearers. At that time, sword-bearers had almost become the religion of mankind. It was stipulated that every human must satisfy all of the sword-bearers' requests. Even if the sword-bearers fancied your wife, you had to obediently give up your bedroom. In short, it was a crazy period. All kinds of things that are now unacceptable were happening in that era. As the highest leader of mankind, it was only natural that the chairman of the Yangjing City Council would say something that sounded a little anti-human. Later, this worship gradually subsided, and the Sword Committee sealed most of the historical information about this period. Even Sword Maiden Online basically avoided the stories that happened during that period. There were many famous battles and campaigns during that period, and they could be passed down as dungeons. However, that period of history happened after Zhetian Jendi became Jendi. Of course, the chairman of Yangjing City didn't say such words, but the people of Bayan tribe didn't know about it at all. On the contrary, they, who knew how cruel the path of survival was, agreed with this sentence from the bottom of their hearts. As long as there could be a sword-bearer in Bayan tribe, it would be worth it even if they had to bury half of the tribe's population. As long as they didn't bury their loved ones, it didn't matter if other people died. Hearing Gu Han's words, cold sweat instantly appeared on the forehead of the Bayan tribe's chief. Especially when Gu Han secretly ordered King Yu to use the advanced skill Death of King Yu. The 3 sword slaves crawled out of the soil like zombies and surrounded the Bayan tribe's chief in a triangular formation. The air in the entire room froze. Sir is right, we were too petty. Seeing that the situation was not right, Quan immediately stood in front of his father, and said to his father, "Father, compared to the righteousness of mankind, what is the life and death of our Taowu tribe? Father, hand over the sword maidens you collected to Lord Ji Han." "Yes, yes, yes." The chief said yes 3 times and opened a secret compartment. Quan jumped in and came out with a dozen swords in just a few steps. Gu Han took a quick glance and saw the white iron sword among the swords. He knew that the second main mission was done. "Yi Qing, go and touch these sword ladies," Gu Han said to Yi Qing. Yi Qing nodded excitedly and immediately rushed to the pile of swords and started testing them one by one. "Sir Gu Han, to become a sword-bearer, I just have to touch these swords." Quan's eyes lit up when he heard what Gu Han said to Yi Qing. He keenly sensed some important information. "That's right. You can also touch them. It's best if you succeed. This way, we humans will have 2 more sword-bearers," Gu Han said indifferently. Even a fool could see that this dungeon was Yi Qing's home dungeon. It was a dungeon to promote the great deeds of the young heaven-covering Jendi. It had nothing to do with Quan, who was just a side character. Unfortunately, Quan did not think so. His ability was not inferior to Yi Qing's. Why could he, Yi Qing, obtain the favor of a sword-bearer while Quan could not? Nobles, generals, and ministers all had guts. Ah, heavens! What happened? Jade Emperor above, what a dazzling light. At this time, Yi Qing finally touched the most important sword lady in his life, the white iron sword. The moment he touched it, The white iron sword blossomed with a dazzling light and entered Yi Qing's body. And Yi Qing, the young heaven-covering Jendi, also began the first synchronization in his life. So this is a sword-bearer. Seeing this scene, Anquan's eyes were filled with envy and jealousy. He hoped that the person shrouded in the light was him and not this damn Yi Qing. How good would it be if everything was reverse? Anquan could only be envious and jealous. He had touched each of these swords no less than 10 times. If his sword lady was among them, he would have become a sword-bearer long ago. None of you are allowed to touch Yi Qing's body. I will kill you. After Yi Qing was petrified, some people curiously wanted to touch Yi Qing's body. In the end, they shrank back in fear after hearing Guhan's words. Guhan's words were filled with murderous intent. He would really kill someone. This is unexpectedly boring. Guhan suddenly felt that this dungeon was too boring. Along the way, he found Yi Qing, killed a tank, and showed off his strength in the tribe. According to the main storyline, a group of Yuan Ku would rush to their deaths. All Guhan needed to do was protect Yi Qing and kill the attacking Yuan Ku. After that, the dungeon would end and he would return to the Dungeon Evaluation Center to receive his reward. It seemed quite boring. Other than seeing the young heaven-covering Jendi, which made Guhan a little excited, there was nothing else interesting. None of the Yuan Ku here could block Guhan's sword. If Guhan got serious, it would just be a boring massacre. The dungeon was not challenging at all. As a side dungeon of the ancient sword dungeon, the majority of the players had a good opinion of it. The previous Tiger-class tank, Yuan Ku, had required a lot of tactics to kill it. There were more than 10,000 posts on the forum on how to eliminate the Little Bin tank. There was also the wave of Yuan Ku that would come later, which required a lot of skill to survive. There were more than 100,000 posts about this wave of Yuan Ku. All in all, this dungeon was a single-player dungeon that required all new players to study and execute their strategies carefully. Many Ancient Sword Dreaming Souls players would be stuck at this dungeon more than a dozen times before they could obtain an A rank rating. The entire process was filled with excitement for these players. According to the analysis of the players, Heroes Begin with Insignificance was a dungeon that allowed players to train their various basic combat skills. As long as they could defeat all the Yuan Ku in this dungeon with their own strength, they would have a basic understanding of how to fight against Yuan Ku. This was only the first benefit of this dungeon. The second benefit was that it allowed players to train their ability to get along with others. When facing the hostility of the Zongzi tribe and Yi Qing, players needed to learn how to become friends with them. When facing the resistance of the Zongzi tribe, players needed to learn how to convince them to listen to them. Thirdly, and also the most important point, the creators of this dungeon hoped that the players could experience the growth of the sky covering Jendi Yi Qing, and experience Yi Qing's indomitable, courageous, and unwavering qualities, but probably didn't know that players could analyze such things from this instance dungeon. However, it was undeniable that this dungeon was a very interesting dungeon for new players. It was a pity that this dungeon had a freak like Guhan, who could easily crush the dungeon. It lost its original intention of training the players. This also made Guhan feel that it was not interesting at all. Sir Chief, bad news, we just found a large wave of Yuan Ku coming towards our oasis from the northwest. Just like the Zongzi tribe, there was another reckless Yuan Ku charging towards them. How many? How many of them are there? Don't King tell me a large wave, how would I know how many there are? 100, number 200, no, at least 300. At least 300 people, Sir Chief. The messenger panicked. What? How could this be? The chief jumped up, then felt dizzy and fainted. 300 Yuan Ku, our Zongzi tribe is dead this time. This was the last sentence that came to the chief's mind. System notification. Quest 2 completed. Yi Qing has synchronized with Bai Tai Jian. System notification. Main quest updated. Quest 3. Protect the oasis. A large wave of Yuan Ku attacks. Please lead Yi Qing to defeat this group of Yuan Ku. Please note, let Yi Qing kill Yuan Ku with his own hands to accumulate dungeon evaluation. It's getting more and more boring. Guhan sighed in his heart. Forget it, let's finish this dungeon as soon as possible. Unfortunately, Guhan didn't know that this dungeon that made him feel extremely boring would bring about all kinds of consequences that Guhan could never have imagined, causing him to be in huge trouble. Chapter 306. When Yi Qing woke up from his petrified state, Guhan didn't explain anything to Yi Qing. He directly grabbed Yi Qing's neck and ran to the northwest entrance. There, countless people with all sorts of weapons were gathered there. Even though their hands were trembling, they still stood there without any intention of running. What are these humans standing here for? They don't have weapons with sword essence, so they can't attack Yuan Ku. They're just throwing away their lives here. Seeing these humans immersed in fear, Yu Wang asked in confusion. She thought that the humans here should be running away. Didn't you notice the women and children who were packing up? Guhan was a bit annoyed. If they all choose to run, then most of the women and children will die here. These men are their husbands and fathers. They can only use their lives to delay Yuan Ku so that their wives and children have a chance to escape. Guhan's explanation was a bit annoyed, but the huge tragedy contained within was unavoidable. In this era, when humans faced Yuan Ku's attack, they could only run or wait for death. Most of the time, they used their own deaths to exchange for the lives of the people they cared about. This was the tragedy of the human world. This king will definitely save them. This king doesn't want to see these men die here. Yu Wang was moved by these people even though they were just data. Guhan didn't pay attention to Yu Wang's words. All of his attention was on Yuan Ku, who was rushing over like a flood. These Yuan Ku were actually the same as the 4 female high school students, Yuan Ku. They all looked and dressed like female high school students. They wore sailor suits with white tops and green bottoms. When their green miniskirts fluttered in the wind, one could almost see a mysterious white domain inside. What a group of cute girls. If their eyes weren't red, they would look like beasts that wanted to eat people. It should also be noted that these girls were not unarmed. They were holding long wooden rifles in their hands and lined up neatly. If their gender and attire were ignored, they could be said to be a well-trained army. Yuan Ku's name, German High School Commando Team. Level, Mouse, 2-dimensional world, Anime world, entry instance dungeon. A small portion of the instance dungeon, HP, half a star attack, half star agility, half a star demonic energy, none. Ability, proficient military skills, and a Mauser 98 sniper rifle. Ultimate move, crouching shot introduction, an ordinary female high school student in Japan. Due to the popularity of firearms in this world, they have undergone various military and firearms training and have mastered proficient military skills. Because the high school was run by the Germans, the school's ethos was very respectful of Germany. All the weapons and training methods used were German weapons and methods. They strictly followed orders and were a troop with a strong will to fight. After coming to the real world, because of their German military style, they were recruited by Yuan Ku, the Nazi King Hitler, and formed into a unit called the German High School Commando Team. Commando soldiers are not scary on their own. Any sword mistress can beat them up. However, once they form a unit, they must be careful not to be shot into a sieve by the enemy before they can even attack. Pay special attention to the commando team's weapon is a Mauser 98 sniper rifle. This rifle is extremely accurate and can hit an opponent from 800 meters away. The downside is that it has a very slow firing rate and a long time between shots. No threat. Guhan skimmed through the information. Although there are a lot more of them. No threat was not a threat to Guhan, but to a normal ancient sword wielder, this was a huge threat. Hundreds of Yuan Ku armed with guns, even if each bullet could only deal 1 damage to the close-range shield, and even if the hit rate was only 10%, it would only take a few rounds of firing. After a dozen rounds of firing, the pitiful 50-point close-range shield of the ancient sword wielder would be depleted. The most successful strategy on the forum was to instruct the players to hide with Yi Qing in a hidden place. They would order their own sword mistresses and Yi Qing's sword mistresses to hide in the sand. When Yuan Ku's troops got close, they would charge into the middle of Yuan Ku's formation and engage in close-range combat with the Yuan Ku. Sword Mistress Online did not have an automatic identification system. Whether it was the Sword Mistress or the Yuan Ku, Their attacks could hurt their own people. Therefore, when the sword mistresses charged into the formation, most of the Yuan Ku's shots would hit their own people. This way, they could use Yuan Ku's hands to kill their enemies. However, there was a downside to this strategy. Most of the Yuan Kus would die to Yuan Ku. The number of Yuan Ku's sword mistresses that died to Yi Qing's sword mistresses would not be many. This way, the dungeon's rating would not be very high, and it would be difficult to get a B rank rating. So, of course, Ji Yuhan wouldn't choose this method to complete the dungeon. Ji Yuhan wouldn't come to this dungeon at all. If he didn't get an SS grade or above, then he wouldn't be able to keep his face as a commander. Yi Qing, follow behind me. Don't be afraid. Ji Yuhan calmly ordered Yi Qing as he watched the high school female assault squad approaching from afar. Then, he walked out of his bunker and faced the enemy's muzzles. Lord Guhan, shouldn't we lie in ambush and wait for them to get close before charging in? Our sword mistresses are melee fighters after all. Yi Qing was dumbfounded when he saw Guhan's actions. He quickly advised Guhan against it and even gave a battle plan. After listening carefully, wasn't it the most practical plan that was announced on the forum? Yi Qing was indeed the future Jendi. In just a moment, he had come up with the best battle plan. It's fine. Just follow behind me. I can guarantee that you won't die. Guhan was unmoved. He still asked Yi Qing to hide behind him and follow him forward. Yi Qing hesitated for a moment. He gritted his teeth and spat on the ground. Then, he chased after Guhan and followed behind him, facing the hundreds of black muzzles. Ready. Open fire. At the sight of someone jumping out, the female high school seniors immediately aimed at Ji Yuhan. When Ji Yuhan entered their firing range of 800 meters, at the command of the officers, all the muzzles lit up like fireworks. Hundreds of bullets were fired at Ji Yuhan at the same time. System prompt: you have received bullet damage. Personal shield energy, -1. System prompt: you have received bullet damage. Personal shield energy, -1. With the support of the famous sword-class swordmistress Yu Wang's shield, the mouse-level Yuan Ku's bullets couldn't even break through Guhan's defense. If it wasn't for the minimum damage limit of 1 point, it might have even been 0. 1 points of damage. This damage was meaningless to Guhan. It was no wonder Guhan would put on airs and face the Yuan Ku's muzzles. Ready, open fire. As Ji Yuhan continued to advance, the female high school commando squad immediately dropped to the ground. Using a standard crouching shooting posture, they fired volleys after volleys at Ji Yuhan. Although their aim was good, and 10 to 20 out of 100 bullets hit Ji Yuhan's body, it was a pity that it was useless. The energy bar of Ji Yuhan's protective shield did not seem to move at all. This king is going to charge. Yu Wang, who was with Guhan, had taken dozens of bullets and was filled with rage. Seeing that the Yuan Ku were less than 200 meters away, he planned on charging in. No, don't move. Ji Yuhan stopped King Yu's actions. He wasn't worried that King Yu would be in any danger if he charged in. If he was fine facing the Yuan Shen's attacks, then King Yu wouldn't be in any danger. The reason why Guhan didn't let Yu Wang in was because he was afraid that Yu Wang would kill quickly. If he killed all the Yuan Kus, what would Yi Qing do? How would he get an evaluation of SS or above? Therefore, Guhan stopped Yu Wang. He wanted to do it himself. Ji Yuhan drew the heaven-reliant sword from its scabbard and infused the sword essence in his hand into it. A second later, an invisible and untouchable sword chi from the 9 swords of mysterious heaven sword descends upon the abyss, shot out from the blade of the sword and slashed at the young girls. Using sword energy to deal with the mouse-level Yuan Kus, Guhan was bullying Yuan Ku too much. It was no different from using a machine gun to strafe a baby. These female students could not even see the sword chi emitted by Ji Yuhan. They only felt that their hair was suddenly blown away by the huge phoenix. They wanted to press their hair back with their hands, but they felt a chill in their lower bodies. Then, they lost their support and fell to the ground. Yi Qing looked at everything in front of him in shock. He didn't understand what had happened. He only saw Guhan wave his sword and a few seconds later, Over 20 pairs of smooth and beautiful girls' legs were cut off at the knees. Then, the Yuan Kus fell to the ground like dominoes. Although they wouldn't die in a short time, their combat strength was basically gone. Guhan sent out a few more sword energy. None of the remaining girls' Yuan Kus were spared. Just like the 20 or so girls before, they were all cut off at the knees by Guhan and became crippled. Guhan had specially chosen the position of the knees because the blood vessels there were protected by the kneecap. If the knees were cut off, the blood loss wouldn't be as fast as other parts of the body. These Yuan Kus could live for at least another 10 minutes. It's over. Seeing the aggressive Yuan Kus army, Yi Qing was prepared to die. He followed behind Guhan and fought. He had thought that he would have to go through a battle of life and death before he could obtain the final victory. He hadn't expected that in less than 30 seconds, all the Yuan Kus would fall. Although they weren't dead, they had only been stabbed once. Yi Qing, release your sword mistress. Guhan coolly sheathed heavenly sword into its scabbard. Just like how you killed the 4 Yuan Kus, kill these Yuan Kus as well. Guhan was really a good guy. This was equivalent to him beating all the monsters to a critical state and letting Yi Qing kill them. This was the kind of teammate you needed when playing games. Chapter 307. Father, Father. Inside the chieftain's house, the chieftain of the Mastiff tribe was shaken awake by Quan. The first thing the chieftain did after waking up was to immediately hug his son and loudly shout, "Quan, take all the women and children and escape from here. From now on, you are the chieftain of our Mastiff tribe. Do you understand?" "Dad, what are you doing?" Quan pushed his father away. "Why are we running away? I'm not leaving." "Good son, Dad knows you don't want me to leave, but Dad is the chief of the tribe. Without Dad to lead them, they will not fight with all their strength. Dad must be at the forefront to buy time for you to escape." "Not good, I can't talk nonsense anymore. How long have I been unconscious? How far are those Yuan Ku now?" "Okay, Dad, don't worry about those Yuan Ku, they are all dead." Quan shouted. "Dead?" The chief began to be confused again. "More than 300 Yuan Ku, all dead?" "Not 300, at most 100 or so." The informant was scared silly and spouted nonsense, Quan corrected. "What's the difference between 300 and 100? One of them can destroy our whole tribe." The chief muttered, his mind was gradually waking up. But how did these 100 Yuan Ku die just like that? Could it be that they were killed by the sword-bearer named Guhan? Who else could it be? Quan nodded. Just now, he followed closely behind Guhan and watched the whole process of Guhan's massacre from the fence. Guhan braved the rain of bullets and moved forward fearlessly. Then, with just a few swings of his sword in the air, all the knees of Yuan Ku were cut off. This kind of fighting ability completely changed Quan's understanding of Yuan Ku and the sword-bearer. It turned out that the seemingly powerful Yuan Ku was so fragile. It turned out that humans could become powerful to this extent after having a sword mistress. No wonder the chairman of Yangjing City was willing to exchange the lives of 10 ordinary people for a sword-bearer. To Quan, it would be worth it even if he had to sacrifice 100 lives to exchange for it. Quan completely repeated the battle process to his father. The chief did not speak for a long time. After a long time, he finally said, "Fortunately, son, you reacted quickly just now. Otherwise, that sword-bearer would have really killed me." Back on the battlefield, under Guhan's command, Yi Qing's white iron sword began to stab the female high school students who had lost their legs one by one. The white iron sword accurately stabbed into the heart of these Yuan Ku, creating a large hole. Surging blood sprayed more than a meter high. In less than 10 seconds, these female high school students who had been stabbed had all returned to the dimensional vortex. System notification: Mission target Yi Qing has killed Yuan Ku, 118. Please keep up the good work. The more Yuan Ku Yi Qing kills, the higher the dungeon rating. System notification: Mission target Yi Qing has killed Yuan Ku, 119. Please keep up the good work. The more Yuan Ku Yi Qing kills, the higher the dungeon rating. When Yi Qing killed the last Yuan Ku, The number was fixed at 120. This meant that there were a total of 116 soldiers in this female assault team. According to the dungeon rating rules, as long as Yi Qing killed 110 Yuan Ku Yi Qing, he could obtain an SSS rating. With the help of Guhan's heaven-defying sword energy, Yi Qing killed all the Yuan Ku Yi Qing. Not a single one died at the hands of Guhan or King Yu. The SSS rating seemed to be in his grasp. This is getting more and more boring. The dungeon is going to end soon. I should go back and study the Challenge League in 2 days. Guhan thought silently. According to the dungeon process, when this wave of Yuan Ku Yi Qing would be able to officially become a qualified sword-bearer, Guhan would also successfully complete his quest. He could return to the Quest Evaluation Center to receive his quest reward. System notification. Mission target Yi Qing has killed Yuan Ku, 120. Quest 3 completed. Quest updated. System notification. Congratulations, you have triggered the hidden main quest, Quest 4. You can now choose to leave the dungeon and head to the Quest Evaluation Center to complete the quest. You can also choose to continue with the Quest 4. System notification. The difficulty of the Quest 4 and the subsequent quests is extremely high. However, after completing the Quest 4 and the subsequent quests, you will receive a special reward. Please make your choice wisely. What's going on? Another hidden Easter egg quest. When Guhan heard the system notification, he was shocked. What was going on? This dungeon was the same as the Wudong Peak dungeon. It also had a hidden Easter egg. As far as Guhan could remember, the Hero's Rise from Insignificance Instance dungeon did not have any Easter egg content. However, Guhan did not pay much attention to this dungeon. He did not know if this Easter egg had been triggered before. What choice do I have? Naturally, Guhan chose to continue with the dungeon. Despite the high difficulty of the subsequent quests, Guhan's blood began to boil. The reason he felt bored was because this dungeon was too easy. This type of dungeon that was like crushing noobs would only make Guhan feel bored. System notification. Quest updated. Quest 3 completed. System notification. Quest 4, search cause. There have never been so many Yuan Ku Yi in the Suzhou Desert. Please search the nearby area to find the reason for the abnormal appearance of Yuan Ku. A new quest notification appeared. As this was a quest that had never appeared before, all the subsequent quests were unknown to Guhan. This was the equivalent of the hidden dungeon of King Arthur's betrayal. Guhan was filled with anticipation for the subsequent storyline. Lord Guhan, Yi Qing did not disappoint you. I have completed the quest. Yi Qing returned to Guhan's side. Previously, when he killed 4 female high school students, Yuan Ku, Yi Qing could not help but vomit. But now that he had killed 116, Yi Qing was expressionless. No wonder people said that sword emperors were all emotionless humans, and that it was impossible for people with emotions to become sword emperors. Am I a heartless person? Guhan could not help but ask himself. If it was before, Guhan would not hesitate to say that he had no feelings. But now, when Guhan wanted to say this, his eyes could not help but think of Qing Pin and King Yu. This kind of Guhan did not have the face to say that he was heartless. You were shot just now? Guhan noticed some black marks on Yi Qing's body and asked. Yes, those Yuan Ku's hands were not broken. He often lay on the ground and shot at me. At first, he was inexperienced, so he was shot 25 times. Yi Qing's face was slightly red. It seemed that being injured by an enemy who had lost the ability to fight was a very embarrassing thing. Hey, you actually remember how many times you were shot? Jiyu Han was once again amazed by Yi Qing's innate talent. Even when he was being shot, he still had the time to remember how many bullets he had been hit by. His thoughts were even more meticulous than Jiyu Han's. At the very least, Jiyu Han had already forgotten how many bullets he had been hit by. How much damage did one shot do to you? How much energy does your armor have left? Guhan thought of something and asked. It seems to be 3 points of damage. Yi Qing scratched his head. He was an NPC, so he was not like Guhan, who could hear the system notification about damage. But when Guhan asked, The number 3 popped up in his head. As for energy, there is about 90% left, 3 points of damage, 25 points of damage. That's 75 points of damage. When Guhan heard this string of numbers, he began to calculate in his mind. 75 points of damage is only 10% of his shield's energy. In other words, his armor has more than 750 points of shield energy. I remember that the Sword Maiden form's Guardian ratio is 0.2750 points. It's the sword essence multiplied by the Guardian ratio. If I do the reverse calculation, Yi Qing's sword essence should be more than 3,250 points. Yi Qing, how old are you now? Guhan asked. 17. Yi Qing replied readily, and then added, I'll be 18 in 10 months. His only 17, Guhan exclaimed. This meant that Yi Qing's 3,250 points of innate sword essence were all from his sword essence. 3,250 innate sword essence was enough to enter the top 10 of the innate sword essence leaderboard. It seemed that Zhe Tianzhendi's strength was not entirely based on his hard work and character. Innate sword essence was also a very important factor. Thinking about it, the strongest sword wielder in history, who was also the first sword wielder in the Sword Ancestor calendar, was said to have surpassed the Emperor sword-level sword wielder. He was an invincible god who could kill 3 desolate-level Yuan Hun at the same time. His innate sword element was more than 15,000 quark. His talent was the best among all the sword-bearers. Guhan could not help but think of himself. He only had 9 innate sword essence. If he was ranked at the bottom of his talent, he might still be on the leaderboard. With this talent, could he really become an Emperor sword-level sword wielder? At that moment, Guhan began to doubt himself. However, he immediately reacted and forcefully cut off this dangerous thought. Once a person began to doubt his own future, he would no longer be able to maintain the courage to move forward. This was the most dangerous part. One may have doubts about his environment, about his friends, about knowledge, about objective and subjective things, about everything, but he must never have doubts about himself. Can I succeed? Am I an idiot? Am I someone who has never used it before? Am I someone who is destined to fail? Once such a thought appeared in your heart, you would not be far from it. This was a piece of advice. Never doubt yourself. Believe that your future is always within reach. Alright, that was the end of the digression. Although Guhan had cut off his own doubts in time, his 2 sword ladies could feel the wavering in his heart through the sword ladies. Although I don't like a certain person, I have to admit that he never doubted himself. It's this world that's wrong, not him. This was what Yi Tian told Guhan through the sword mark. Obviously, the certain person she was talking about was Zhe Tianzhendi. Guhan, your talent is also unique. Think about your sword essence oral fluid. The one who said this was King Yu, who understood Guhan better. Yes, King Yu's words were more effective. Guhan had almost forgotten about his super cheat, sword essence oral fluid. That's right, the heavens were already treating him well. They took away his innate sword essence, but compensated him in other ways. How could he doubt his own future? Yi Qing, no, Zhe Tianzhendi. Guhan stared at Zhe Tianzhendi, who was walking with his head lowered. I will definitely surpass you, surpass Kanzu, surpass all enemies that I can surpass, and return peace to this world. Sigh, I seem to have forgotten to tell Sir Jiyu Han that apart from me, Bai Tai who was with me was also shot. Yi Qing, who was walking with his head lowered, thought to himself in distress, and Bai Tai was shot a bit more, a total of 58 bullets. Forget it, since Lord Guhan didn't ask, I'll just keep my mouth shut. Yes, fortunately, Guhan didn't know. Fortunately, you're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,